Cornelia casually asked where Loberlin had gone yesterday. Loberlin clearly froze for a moment, then said she had not been feeling well and had gone home first. Cornelia was rather worried and asked if she was feeling better now. Loberlin smiled and said she was fine. Then Cornelia suddenly changed the subject and said something major had happened at last night's banquet. The crown prince had nearly killed someone in public, but a mysterious woman stopped him. Loberlin stiffened the moment she heard it and asked if that was true. Cornelia was still sighing in amazement, saying that woman had been far too bold. Little did she know the very person in question was sitting right across from her. The more Cornelia talked, the more excited she became. She said the woman had not only barged in, but had even pointed at the crown prince's nose and called him a bastard over and over. Loberlin listened with her heart pounding. Then Cornelia dropped an even bigger bombshell, saying the crown prince was now searching everywhere for her, and once he caught that woman, he would definitely strangle her with his own hands. As Cornelia was speaking, Loberlin suddenly choked on her tea and began coughing violently. Cornelia hurried over to check on her and asked if something was wrong. Loberlin stammered that the tea was too hot. Seeing Cornelia look so worried, she was filled with guilt. The truth was, there was something she simply did not dare tell Cornelia. The crazy woman Cornelia was talking about was actually Loberlin herself. Last night, not only had she barged into the banquet, she had also spent the entire night entangled with Crown Prince Ian. Loberlin grabbed Cornelia's hand, feeling as if she was about to break down completely. She had indeed been with the Crown Prince, but now her mind was completely blank. She could not remember a single thing. Who could have imagined that the woman who had turned the entire empire upside down was merely an ordinary Viscount's daughter, Loberlin Dines? On one ordinary night, all of Loberlin's memories from her previous life suddenly came crashing back. The reason was absurd. She had been knocked unconscious in the street by a baguette. When she opened her eyes again, she discovered she had transmigrated into a novel. Even worse, she was not some proper heroine, but the most hated villainess in the novel. In the original plot, she would not only steal the husband of her dear friend Cornelia, but also commit every evil deed imaginable, and in the end, she would be publicly beheaded. Her memories had returned, but the countdown to her death had begun as well. The plot of this novel was a standard dark revenge story. After being betrayed, the heroine Cornelia would eliminate her enemies one by one, and the first target on her revenge list was none other than me. According to the original plot, Crown Prince Ian would eventually grow tired of her, then turn around and seduce me. As the daughter of a mere viscount, I would have no way to refuse the imperial family. The result was that I would be sent to the guillotine by Cornelia herself, just as the original author wrote, and die on the spot. Now things were truly troublesome. To protect this head of mine, I absolutely could not give Cornelia any reason to take revenge. Loberlin finally figured it out. Since the source of every tragedy was Cornelia marrying the crown prince, then all she had to do was ruin that marriage. Not only did she have to separate them, she also had to find her best friend a truly good match. As long as Cornelia lived happily, wouldn't she, the villainess, be completely redeemed? Loberlin felt certain this would work. It was practically easier than eating a small cake. But just then, a maid suddenly pushed the door open, holding an invitation. She said it had been sent by the Calla family. Hearing that name, Loberlin's heart skipped a beat. A banquet held by the Calla family was no fun place. Loberlin suddenly realized that this banquet at the Calla family estate was a famous scene from the original work. Cornelia and Crown Prince Ian had met here for the first time, and had even privately pledged themselves to each other. Seeing that she said nothing for a long while, the maid thought she did not want to go and was about to write a letter declining the invitation. No, absolutely not. She could not refuse. Loberlin snatched the invitation and loudly declared that she had to attend. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As long as she could stop them from meeting, she could completely sever the ill-fated connection between Cornelia and that scumbag crown prince. Loberlin originally thought that as long as she personally stepped in, everything would remain under her control. But she had still thought too simply. When Loberlin woke up, she only felt as if her head were filled with lead. Her memories of last night were completely fragmented. She clearly remembered handing all her plans over to her dear friend Cornelia, while she herself drowned her sorrows in alcohol. But when she saw her surroundings clearly, she was instantly dumbfounded. This was indeed a room in the Earl's estate. But why was she wearing only a nightgown? Even worse, the ache in her waist and back made her heart sink. This was bad. Could something unspeakable really have happened last night? Loberlin discovered that she was lying in a strange man's bed. It felt like a dream. At first, she thought that since it had already happened, she might as well act mature and treat it as a secret forever. But when she tried to wake the other person and saw his face clearly, she was completely stunned. This man was none other than the original novel scumbag who had ruined Cornelia's life, Crown Prince Ian. No matter how carefully Loberlin had planned, she never imagined she would end up sleeping with the person she most needed to avoid. Forget redemption. She had practically jumped straight into a fire pit. Ian asked groggily who was there. Loberlin froze completely. Why'd it have to be this man? She had actually gotten into such an absurd situation with Crown Prince Ian. Although her memories were extremely blurry, judging from the mess throughout the room, even an idiot would know what had happened last night. Now, everything had truly gone off the rails. Ian rubbed his head and sat up, asking what exactly had happened last night and telling her to explain everything clearly. Loberlin suddenly realized something. From his tone, did this man also have a blackout? Since Ian remembered nothing, this was the best chance to slip away. Loberlin made a split-second decision, grabbed her clothes, and rushed toward the window. Now, it was Ian's turn to be stunned. He had no idea what this woman was trying to do. Why was she opening the window so early in the morning? Seeing that Loberlin was about to jump out, Ian shouted anxiously, asking what madness had gotten into her. Loberlin had no time to explain. She had only one thought in mind. She had to disappear from his sight before her identity was exposed. This time, Loberlin truly risked everything. Wearing such a cumbersome long dress, she actually jumped straight out the window. Ian was completely dumbstruck behind her. He had never seen anything like this before, and even thought the woman was risking her life. Fortunately, it was only the first floor. After landing steadily, Loberlin did not dare look back and immediately ran for her life. At that moment, reputation and etiquette were all thrown to the back of her mind. She had only one thought: to escape this troublesome place as quickly as possible. As long as she ran fast enough, last night's absurd incident could be treated as if it had never happened. Ian could not help sighing that the scene just now had been utterly insane. He asked in a low voice who that woman was. Looking at her retreating figure, Ian was not angry. Instead, he found the matter more and more interesting. The torn piece of fabric hanging on the fence became the only clue Loberlin had left behind. It seemed this account would have to be settled sooner or later. Even if she had caused a huge disaster, they could not simply take her life. Ian coldly asked why not. That woman had slipped into his chamber in the middle of the night. If she had been an assassin, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Brian quickly reminded him that night, she had genuinely stayed by the Crown Prince's side. Ian swung his sword sharply. Since she was a noble lady, the matter was even more complicated. While parrying, Brian wondered why Ian, who usually hated dances like that the most, had insisted on going there and causing such a commotion this time. Ian stopped moving and said he had only gone to investigate someone. Who could have expected such an accident? Brian suspected the woman had been sent by the Queen, but Ian shook his head. If she truly were one of the Queen's people, the whole city would already be full of rumors by now. No matter who she was, he would personally find her. Brian scratched his head as he listened. Ian had not even seen her face clearly, so where was he supposed to search? Brown hair and a white dress. Weren't women like that everywhere on the streets? Ian did not argue. Although there truly were not many clues, he would never forget everything that happened that night for the rest of his life. With such an unforgettable feeling engraved in his bones, how could he possibly mistake her for someone else? No matter the cost, he had to find that woman and figure out what had really happened behind it all. Seeing him so fixated, Brian simply issued a harsh warning. If Ian still refused to stop, Brian would deliberately make the matter bigger and let the Queen hear some rumors. Everyone knew the Queen's methods. As long as she caught the slightest weakness, she would absolutely use it as an excuse to stir up trouble. When the Emperor became angry, Ian might not be able to keep his position as Crown Prince. After hearing this, Ian smiled instead. Since Brian knew the consequences were that serious, he had even more reason to help him suppress this matter and absolutely prevent the situation from getting out of control. As he spoke, he handed over a piece of torn cloth. Brian was completely baffled now. What was this? This torn cloth had actually been ripped from that woman's dress. Brian immediately got the wrong idea. Ian quickly interrupted him and told him to put away those ridiculous thoughts. It was not what he imagined at all. Since they had a clue now, the search would be entirely entrusted to him. Before Brian could react, Ian continued, saying too many people were watching him, and only by handing this matter to Brian could he feel at ease. The moment Ian called him Your Grace, Brian knew he could not escape. It seemed he had to accept this troublesome task, whether he wanted to or not. After giving the torn cloth to the Duke, Ian did not sit idle either. He personally searched through every banquet, but that woman seemed to have vanished from the world. He did not even see her shadow. Even more annoyingly, he still had to deal with these boring family meals. Queen Camilla suddenly spoke, saying she had heard Ian had been frequently attending all sorts of parties recently. Places with many people invited much trouble, so he had best restrain himself. Before Ian could answer, the Emperor threw out another bombshell. It was also time to settle his marriage. Was there any noble lady from any family who had caught his eye? Now things were troublesome. Ian's mind was full of only that vanished woman, but pressure from the imperial family was already right before him. This time, the Emperor was serious. Pointing at Cornelia in the portrait, he said this girl was not only beautiful, but her family's dowry was unmatched. She was simply the perfect candidate for crown princess. He turned and asked Ian what he thought. In the end, Ian sat there without saying a word for a long while. Only after the Emperor called him several times in a row did he suddenly come back to his senses and quickly apologize. Queen Camilla, sitting to the side, noticed something and smiled as she asked whether he already had someone in his heart. Before Ian could answer, she took the initiative to smooth things over, saying that marriage was indeed a major matter that needed careful consideration. On the surface, she was helping Ian out of trouble, but in reality, the Queen had already begun laying her plans. However, she immediately followed with a request. Since Ian was not yet ready, then she, as Queen, would first go meet this Lady Cornelia. Camilla took the task upon herself and said she would keep a close eye on the matter. Those words sent chills down one's spine. Clearly, she had already set her sights on this marriage. Ian knew better than anyone that the Queen absolutely did not want to see him get engaged smoothly. The more stable his position became, the farther her own son Maximilian would be from the throne. To avoid the Queen's schemes, marrying the daughter of an earl was indeed the best strategy. Ian understood all the reasoning, but his mind was filled entirely with the image of that woman. This absolutely could not continue. No matter the price, he had to find that woman. Meanwhile, Cornelia was strolling through the garden with Loberlin. The sunlight was perfect, and both of them were in exceptionally good moods. Cornelia sighed that she really was happiest when she was with her dear friend. If that accident from that night had not happened, this life would have been perfect. But unfortunately, that mistake had become a lingering shadow in Loberlin's heart. Loberlin gathered her thoughts and asked Cornelia when Brian would arrive. Cornelia smiled and answered that he should be there soon. Speak of the devil, and he appears. Brian actually showed up. He silently leaned close to Loberlin's ear and smiled as he asked whether they were saying bad things about him. Loberlin was clearly not mentally prepared and was badly startled. Her foot slipped and she nearly fell. Fortunately, Brian reacted quickly and caught her steadily. Brian hurriedly apologized, saying he had not expected to scare her so badly. Loberlin stubbornly insisted that she had simply lost her footing. But looking at that face so close before her, Loberlin felt dazed. Was this man before her truly Brian? In Loberlin's eyes, Brian was the real male lead. Whether in character or appearance, he left Ian several streets behind. Especially his deep affection for Cornelia. He was practically willing to give everything for her. If she had not known he was destined to belong to Cornelia, who could possibly resist such charm? Cornelia suddenly changed the topic and asked about the Crown Prince's recent situation. Brian sighed helplessly and said His Highness was now practically possessed. He insisted on finding that woman at any cost, but they had no clues at all. This matter had already become the royal family's greatest problem. The only clues at present were a white dress and brown hair. Loberlin still held on to a bit of hope, thinking the Crown Prince must have remembered incorrectly in the moment. But Brian's next words directly shattered her fantasy. He actually had evidence in his hand, a torn piece of fabric ripped from a dress. Loberlin completely lost her composure. How had that thing ended up in his hands? Before she could think of how to explain, Brian had already taken the fabric and gone to ask Cornelia. Cornelia looked at it carefully. The fabric did indeed seem familiar. She turned to look at Loberlin behind her. Wasn't this from a dress you wore that day? Now Loberlin was completely dumbfounded. Brian also became suspicious. Had this thing really fallen from Loberlin? Loberlin panicked and denied it repeatedly, saying she had never seen that fabric before. Cornelia quickly stepped in to smooth things over, saying she had been with Loberlin the entire time, and there was absolutely no mistake. Only then did Loberlin finally breathe a sigh of relief, calling Cornelia her lifesaver. But as Brian looked at the two of them, he felt things were not that simple. Cornelia recalled how Brian had moved effortlessly through the banquet, handling every toast flawlessly. Loberlin had stepped in directly and blocked all the alcohol for Cornelia. Cornelia held Loberlin's hand, looking deeply grateful. Loberlin had already made up her mind. As long as she kept giving Brian false hope, that man named Ian would eventually give up completely. Loberlin was thinking far too optimistically. She thought that since tomorrow was a day off, she could invite Brian to visit a dessert shop. Brian's heart had already gone mostly cold. What day off? Not only did he have piles of official documents to handle, he also had to remain on standby at any moment, waiting for the crown prince to summon him over and scold him. Most troublesome of all, he still had to track down that mysterious woman. With such a non-stop schedule, how could he have any mind for desserts? Seeing his miserable state, even the people nearby could not bear it. His life was truly even more exhausting than a servant's. His superior was simply inhuman. There were so many tasks they could not even be counted. Even if Brian stopped sleeping, he still could not finish them all. Loberlin still refused to give up and chased after him, asking when his next day off would be. As soon as Brian opened his mouth, he said he had to work overtime that day too. Loberlin tried asking about the day after, but the answer was the same. It seemed the fate of this working man had been thoroughly controlled by his boss. In the end, she could only accept disaster. Her date plan was completely ruined. It seemed tomorrow she could only spend time with Cornelia. Loberlin was growing restless now. Before Ian came over to cause trouble, she had to make Brian and Cornelia's relationship take another step forward. At their current slow pace, when on earth would these two get together? In the original story, Cornelia had never dared take that step. She always felt maintaining the status quo was good enough, and feared that if she confessed, they might not even remain friends in the end. Loberlin knew very well that if nothing unexpected happened, getting them to open their hearts to each other was basically hopeless. Just then, Cornelia appeared. Loberlin made up her mind that today she would put all her attention on Cornelia under the noble name of Cornelia Research. But just as she was about to greet her, the situation instantly spun out of control. A carriage rushed straight toward them like mad. Even stranger, there was no coachman on it. Cornelia was about to be unable to dodge. Loberlin had no time to think. She shouted at the top of her lungs for Cornelia to move, then threw herself forward. At that critical moment, she forcibly pushed Cornelia to the side of the road. Cornelia finally managed to keep her life. But this sudden change left her completely stunned. Seeing that Cornelia was finally safe, the weight hanging over Loberlin's heart had just dropped. As long as the person was saved, nothing else mattered. But she had been so focused on saving someone that she forgot she was still under the horse's hooves. Now, it was her turn to have nowhere to hide. Looking at the huge shadow falling above her, Loberlin had only one thought. Was she really going to die here today? Seeing the horse's hoof about to stomp down, she was truly doomed this time. At that deadly moment, the impact she expected did not happen. The crazed horse had actually been forcibly stopped by someone. Loberlin collapsed onto the ground, still not recovered from the chaos, when a man appeared before her. The man asked in a low voice, "Are you all right?" Hearing that voice, Loberlin's heart sank. How could it be him? Crown Prince Ian had actually appeared at this moment. Before the carriage lost control, someone had anonymously reported something. A legendary poisonous herb had appeared in the bustling commercial street. Brian saw Ian's exhaustion and deliberately found an excuse to bring him out for a change of mood. Although Ian had arrived at the scene, looking at the lively spring scenery outside the window did not make him happy at all. Because every time the season came around, he would remember the most painful event of his past. The anniversary of his mother's death was approaching. But ironically, on that day back then, that man had not cared at all. He had only been busy discussing a wedding with his new lover, discussing how many beautiful new outfits she should change into, completely forgetting that there was still a child standing before a gravestone. At the time, The young Ian had clutched white flowers tightly in his hands. He could not understand how that man could be so cold-blooded when his mother had only just passed away. But the people around him merely told him that this was the way of the imperial family. The higher one's status, the less right one had to speak of feelings. The carriage was nearly at the commercial street. Ian came back to his senses and looked at the bustling scene outside. At a glance, he saw Loberlin. At that moment, she was on the verge of danger. Ian had no time to think. He pushed open the carriage door and was about to jump down. Beside him, Brian shouted anxiously, "Your Highness, it's too dangerous." The carriage had not yet stopped, but Ian would not listen. He only replied, "I know," and then rushed out. At a time like this, aside from saving her, there was no other thought in his mind. At the final moment, he managed to protect her in his arms and asked if she had come to her senses. Although Loberlin apologized, she could not stop grumbling inwardly. Why did it have to be this enemy who saved her? Before she could figure out how to escape, Ian suddenly told her to wait. With that, Ian laid everything out directly. He smiled and asked Loberlin, "You actually recognized me long ago, didn't you?" Loberlin completely lost her composure. The thing she feared most had still happened. Had he really seen through everything? Loberlin panicked completely. If she were caught on the spot, the consequences would be unthinkable. At that critical moment, Brian's shout rang out. Now everything was exposed. Ian's identity as Crown Prince was officially revealed. Everyone around them was so frightened that they knelt all over the ground. He behaved very calmly, telling everyone to rise, looking as if he were considerate of his subjects. Cornelia hurried over and hugged Loberlin. As long as she was all right, that was enough. But Brian was completely stunned now as he looked at the two women before him. He quickly came over to confirm the situation and check whether they were injured. Brian directly stepped forward to vouch for them, saying these two ladies were both his friends. Cornelia bowed to the Crown Prince and thanked him for helping. Ian nodded, then turned to look at Loberlin and asked who she was. Loberlin could only steel herself and answer, introducing herself as Loberlin of the Dines family. She politely thanked Ian as well, but Ian merely repeated the name again and again, his gaze seeming as if it wanted to see right through her. Now Loberlin was truly unable to sit still. Seeing that the situation was wrong, Brian quickly stepped in to smooth things over. He wanted to use the excuse of sending Loberlin home, while letting Ian accompany Cornelia. Who knew Ian would not accept that at all? With one sentence, he blocked Brian completely, telling him to stay behind and handle official matters, giving him no chance to refuse. Brian was stunned on the spot, completely unable to understand what kind of move this was. He could only watch helplessly as the situation spun out of control. Ian turned his head and stared smilingly at Loberlin, saying he would personally escort this young lady home. The moment these words came out, Loberlin was dumbfounded. How was this an escort? This was clearly a lamb entering a tiger's den. Now she truly could not escape. Ian made a polite, inviting gesture and courteously called her Lady Dines. His attitude clearly left no room for refusal. Loberlin could only grit her teeth and get into the carriage. Although Ian did not say much on the way, his scrutinizing gaze made her feel as if she were sitting on pins and needles. After finally enduring until they arrived, she had only one thought in mind: to escape this troublesome place as quickly as possible. Before the other party could speak, she hurriedly tried to say goodbye. Whether she could slip away depended on this moment. Just as Loberlin thought she could get free, Ian suddenly said he wanted to invite her for tea. Loberlin froze completely. Before she could think of how to refuse, Ian directly began morally cornering her. He said that since he was her lifesaver, having a cup of tea was not too much to ask, was it? He even began questioning the Dines family's upbringing. With such a heavy accusation thrown at her, Loberlin had no moves left. She could only sigh silently in her heart. The Crown Prince was actually still waiting. Hearing this news, Loberlin felt terrible. She had deliberately hidden away to change clothes, choosing accessories, and fixing her hair. She had thought that, after dragging things out for so long, he would have lost patience and left. But what happened? Ian had actually declared that no matter how long it took, he was willing to wait. Now things were bad. She could not hide anymore. Loberlin could only steel herself and walk toward the drawing room. The moment the door opened, Loberlin quickly stepped forward to apologize. After all, making the Crown Prince wait so long would make anyone nervous. But Ian was not angry at all. Instead, he stared at a painting on the wall and said he had found something interesting. Loberlin leaned over to look. She nearly cracked apart on the spot. The people in the painting were none other than Loberlin's family of 3. Before she could figure out how to respond, Ian actually spoke directly and asked whether she could give him this painting. Now, Loberlin panicked completely. If he took it back and studied her identity carefully, she would probably be exposed within minutes. Loberlin tried to struggle, saying her family had better famous paintings she could give him. But Ian did not care about that at all. He insisted on taking this one. What on earth was this man thinking? Why did he insist on taking someone else's family portrait? Loberlin could only endure it for now. She planned to find another chance later to ask for the painting back. The tea had barely been set out when Ian prepared to get straight to the point. Loberlin's heart pounded, thinking he was about to pursue the matter of that night. Who knew that when Ian opened his mouth, what he asked about was Cornelia? Did Cornelia have any enemies? The word enemies left Loberlin completely unable to react. This topic shift was far too absurd. Ian's next words sent chills down her spine. He said that carriage accident was not a coincidence at all, but a death trap deliberately set for Cornelia. Loberlin was completely stunned. In her memory, this was supposed to be a romantic scene in the original work where the male and female leads grew closer. But now the plot had gone completely off course. She clearly had not done anything. So why had Cornelia fallen into such danger? She could not help pressing him, asking who the mastermind was. Or rather, whether Ian already had a list of suspects in mind. Ian did not answer directly. He only stared into her eyes and asked, "Do you really want to know?" That one sentence immediately raised the suspense to the highest point. Loberlin hurriedly expressed her sincerity, saying Cornelia was her dearest friend and she would do anything for her. After hearing this, Ian smiled and said that since she was so sincere, as long as she honestly answered one question, he would tell her the truth. Loberlin still did not realize that Ian had already dug a pit for her and was waiting for her to jump in. Ian stared into her eyes. His tone was calm, but every word was weighty. He said that on that night at the Earl's estate, the woman who had been with him was actually her, wasn't it? This direct strike caught Loberlin completely off guard. Loberlin was still struggling desperately, pretending she did not understand. She even tried to use the rotten excuse that the tea had gone cold to hurry away. But Ian had long since seen through her thoughts. Such a clumsy little trick was useless before him. Before she could stand up, Ian pressed straight toward her, his tone full of pressure. He asked Loberlin whether she was planning to run away again. Since she had already been caught red-handed, she might as well admit it. Now Loberlin truly had no way out. Facing such relentless pressure, how could she keep making things up? Ian leaned down directly, trapping Loberlin firmly in her seat. He enunciated every word and said, "That person was you. The woman who slept with me and then ran away." Loberlin was completely stunned now, yet she still desperately argued, saying he must have mistaken her for someone else. But Ian did not buy it at all. Since she wanted to play dumb, then the next account would have to be settled in a different way. Who could have expected Ian to start unbuttoning his clothes without another word? Now Loberlin panicked completely, asking what madness had gotten into him. In the end, the man looked perfectly calm and said he was only helping. Since she had forgotten everything from that night, they could reenact it on the spot and help her properly recover her memories. The moment these words came out, Loberlin froze completely. Was this the kind of thing that could be casually reenacted? She did not understand why he had to go this far. Ian directly held her chin, his tone carrying a trace of unwillingness. Because only she had forgotten, and that was far too unfair to him. Ian pressed closer step by step, his voice full of grievance. Why was she the only one who could leave as if nothing had happened? He drew closer and closer, asking if she had remembered yet. Seeing the atmosphere reach the point where something was about to happen. Right at that critical moment, a knock suddenly sounded outside the door. Brian had actually arrived. Loberlin panicked completely. If Brian saw them like this, she would never be able to clear her name. Yet Ian even looked like the victim, complaining that he had never been treated this way by a woman before. The situation was truly becoming more and more chaotic. After all, Brian was the male lead abandoned in the original work. Not only would he stir up discord everywhere, he would ultimately end up being kicked out of the game. Although the plot had not reached that point yet, she absolutely could not be careless. Loberlin was so anxious she spun in circles, urging Ian to hurry and put his clothes back on. But the more she tried to help, the worse it became, and the two of them crashed into each other. At the most awkward possible moment, the door was suddenly pushed open. Brian barged straight in and saw the two people in the room with their clothes in disarray. Brian froze on the spot. Ian was pressing Loberlin beneath him, and their clothes were a mess. Anyone who saw this scene would misunderstand. Brian's voice was cold to the extreme. "What exactly are you two doing?" Loberlin was scared out of her wits and quickly jumped up to wave her hands and explain. She said this was all a misunderstanding. His Highness had just spilled tea, and while preparing to change clothes, he suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed. Even she felt guilty saying such an absurd excuse. It all depended on whether Brian would believe it. Loberlin desperately tried to patch up the lie. Unexpectedly, Ian actually played along. He put on a weak expression and said it was indeed a lingering effect from the carriage accident. His dizziness had been severe just now. Brian looked doubtful. This reason sounded absurd, but seeing Loberlin's pleading expression, he finally relented and barely let her pass. However, this lie was not free. Brian immediately wanted to call a doctor and have Ian hurry off to rest. Now Ian had no chance to continue flirting. Brian had arranged everything for him clearly. Brian's move was simply brilliant. In name, it was to protect Loberlin, but in reality, it was to forcibly drive Ian away. Although Ian said goodbye verbally, how was this returning to the palace? It looked more like a criminal being escorted away. Loberlin waved awkwardly, finally relieved in her heart. Surely this day's farce should finally end here. The carriage slowly drove away, but the atmosphere inside had dropped to freezing point. Ian looked at Brian across from him and suddenly said coldly that he had never expected Brian to go this far for her. Brian took the initiative to offer to keep the secret. He could pretend he had seen nothing that happened today. He had wanted to suppress this matter to protect Loberlin's reputation, who knew Ian would not appreciate it at all, and directly replied that there was no need. Ian's next words were like a bombshell. He said he had already confirmed that Loberlin was the person he had been searching for all along. Now, it was Brian's turn to be dumbfounded. He never imagined that the person he had gone to such lengths to protect had already been targeted by the Crown Prince. Brian still refused to admit it and felt Ian must have made a mistake. After all, no matter how one looked at Loberlin, she did not seem like that kind of person. But Ian appeared exceptionally calm. He said he was not anxious at all. After all, she was right there. Sooner or later, the truth would come from her own mouth. The urgent matter now was to investigate that coachman and see what tricks were hidden behind that accident. Brian could only lower his head and accept the order. But who could have imagined that only a few days later, the outside world would change completely? A newspaper was slammed hard onto the table. The headline in the newspaper was practically enough to pierce the sky. Once the bounty for the coachman was announced, everyone in the city began discussing it. This was clearly no accident. Queen Camilla was thoroughly furious now. She stared coldly at the Earl before her, her tone full of blame. He could not even cleanly deal with one unarmed woman. Earl Wiggum lowered his head, but inside he felt extremely aggrieved. Easy for her to say. If it had really been that easy to solve, the situation would not have gotten out of control like this. Queen Camilla was truly anxious now. She had never expected that an accident that should have been flawless would actually drag Crown Prince Ian into it. With that man's personality, he would definitely follow this clue and turn everything upside down. Just as Earl Wiggum was at a loss, young Prince Maximilian pushed the door open and entered. The Queen, who had just been full of killing intent, instantly changed her expression. She affectionately pulled her son into her arms. But when she casually asked about his studies for the day, Maximilian complained that today's politics lesson had been far too boring, so he had gone to practice violin instead. Hearing this, the Queen suddenly paused, and the smile on her face gradually disappeared. In her eyes, such idling was nothing less than seeking death. Before Maximilian could react, his mother grabbed his shoulders. She loudly questioned her son, asking whether he had forgotten why he had to study all those dull subjects. In this imperial palace, there was no such thing as a loving mother and filial son. All effort served only one purpose: survival. She stared fixedly into her son's eyes and reminded him word by word that if he did not become strong, he would sooner or later be completely swallowed by that sworn enemy, Ian. Camilla exploded outright. At his age, Ian had already finished all his lessons, yet Maximilian still had the mind to play an instrument. Maximilian quietly argued that he only wanted to learn something besides politics, but in his mother's eyes, this was practically seeking death. Camilla reminded him in an icy tone that the emperor was already old. Once Ian married and secured his position, there would be no place left in this world for them. He had to remember that all of Ian's kindness was an act. Ian hated them to the bone. Once he grasped power, neither mother nor son would survive. Camilla's words grew harsher and harsher. She directly placed life and death on the table, asking whether her son wanted to live, and even asking whether he wanted to watch his own mother die. This extreme psychological pressure left the young Maximilian completely unable to resist. There was only one path before him: absolute obedience. Along with the end of a dream, his most beloved violin was thrown aside. He finally lowered his head and promised that he would never touch such useless things again. Hearing the answer she wanted, Camilla finally smiled. She hugged her son tightly and said she loved him. Maximilian could only mechanically repeat that he loved his mother too. But how was this family affection? It was clearly complete control. This suffocating relationship pressed down so heavily that one could barely breathe. Cornelia was holding Loberlin's hand and apologizing nonstop. She said that if Loberlin had not saved her, she probably would have lost her life. Loberlin, however, acted very open-minded, feeling that as long as Cornelia was safe, that was enough. Besides, Cornelia's family had sent over a huge pile of thank you gifts. After hearing this, Cornelia finally breathed a sigh of relief. But as she looked at her lifesaver before her, it seemed there were still other words stuck in her throat that she had not said. With that gossiping expression on Cornelia's face, she was clearly trying to ask about the progress between Loberlin and the Crown Prince. After all, he had saved the beauty like a hero that day and personally escorted her home. This plot was simply more romantic than a novel. Loberlin, however, found it inexplicable and could not understand what Cornelia was so excited about. Cornelia was sincerely speaking from the heart. As long as Loberlin could find true love, she would be happier than anyone. Loberlin was instead more worried about Cornelia's situation and told her to take care of herself first. The mastermind targeting Cornelia had still not shown themselves. On the surface, Loberlin pretended nothing was wrong, but alarms were already ringing in her heart. She saw things very clearly. Right now, the greatest threat to Cornelia was none other than Crown Prince Ian. The moment she thought of all the grievances Cornelia had suffered before, Loberlin could not remain calm. She suddenly stopped walking and warned Cornelia with a serious face that she absolutely must not be deceived by Ian's appearance. In Loberlin's view, this crown prince was not only narrow-minded, but also the worst marriage partner in the entire empire. Whoever married him would have suffered 8 lifetimes of bad luck. Loberlin was cursing enthusiastically and completely failed to notice someone standing behind her. Ian suddenly cut in and said that receiving such an evaluation was truly his honor. Now things were bad. She had been caught bad-mouthing someone behind his back on the spot. However harshly Loberlin had cursed just now, that was how awkward she felt now. Ian, on the other hand, seemed rather magnanimous. He smiled and said this evaluation was even higher than he had expected. Cornelia reacted the fastest and quickly pulled Loberlin to prepare a greeting. But Ian stopped them. He said he was only visiting incognito today and did not want to cause a commotion like last time. Loberlin appeared obedient on the surface, but inside, she had already exploded. She could not understand where this man had popped out from or how much of what she had just said he had heard. Ian clearly had no intention of letting them off and directly asked what they had been discussing about him just now. Loberlin's mind spun quickly, and she hurriedly made up a lie, saying they were actually discussing a novel. Cornelia also quickly helped smooth things over, saying it was an anonymous story circulating among the common people. Cornelia's acting was truly something else. While making up lies, she desperately signaled with her eyes, insisting that writing the imperial family as villains was inappropriate. Loberlin listened from the side, completely stunned. This lie was far too ridiculous. Ian did not expose them on the surface, but in his heart, he saw everything clearly. He noticed these two always covered for each other. Since that was the case, he could only separate them first. No one expected this crown prince to play by anything resembling common sense. Without another word, he directly picked Loberlin up in his arms and politely asked Cornelia whether he could borrow her for a while. Cornelia's reaction was also amazing. A moment ago, she and Loberlin had been as close as sisters, but the moment she heard the crown prince wanted to take her away, she immediately smiled, nodded, and agreed. This teammate had sold her out far too quickly. Loberlin was now completely despairing. Not only was she being forcibly taken away by Ian, she also had to watch helplessly as her dear friend sent her straight into the fire pit. Watching Ian forcibly take Loberlin away, Cornelia was beyond excited. She thought she had witnessed some extraordinary famous romantic scene. In Cornelia's imagination, Loberlin must have been shy and lying before. His Highness the Crown Prince had definitely finally understood his own feelings. He must be planning an overbearing romantic confession. But reality was nowhere near that romantic. Loberlin only wanted someone to save her. When the two of them sat down in the restaurant, the atmosphere dropped straight to freezing point. With a dark expression, Ian threatened that if Loberlin dared run away again this time, he would personally twist her head off. Although Loberlin felt guilty inside, she refused to give in verbally and insisted she had never avoided him. She even questioned why Ian had gone to such trouble to bring her here. But Ian did not care about that at all. He told Loberlin word by word that he had brought her here to settle things once and for all. Loberlin's mind was now full of question marks. What on earth was this man planning? Ian suddenly called out her full name with a serious face, then made an absurd request. He told her to call him a bastard to his face. The moment these words came out, Loberlin was utterly confused. She even began to suspect whether this crown prince had some strange fetish. Ian clearly saw what she was thinking, and his tone instantly grew cold as he asked whether she thought he was joking. It seemed Ian was serious. He had still not forgotten the insult from when she had pointed at his nose and cursed him. Although Loberlin felt guilty inside, her mouth remained stubborn. She insisted there was no evidence for such a thing, and he could not randomly pin it on her. In the end, Ian said only 2 words, her back. It turned out that from the day of the accident, he had already set his sights on her. He was absolutely certain. Loberlin was that woman who had escaped. Loberlin was still making her final struggle. She insisted Ian had mistaken her for someone else and claimed that she had gone home early after the banquet ended that day. She even suggested bringing out the dress she had worn that day to compare. But Ian did not care about that at all. He casually asked who had escorted her home that night. To support her lie, Loberlin answered without thinking that she had walked alone. This time, she had completely fallen into the trap. After hearing it, Ian laughed out loud. He mocked her sarcastically, saying it seemed Lady Loberlin was not very popular among men. After all the noble young ladies that night had been accompanied by dance partners. Loberlin was rebuked so thoroughly that she could not say a word. This lie was indeed a little too ridiculous. Just as the atmosphere became awkward to the extreme, an unexpected guest suddenly appeared. The arrival of Lady Preston made the already tense situation even more thought-provoking. Loberlin's heart sank. Truly, whatever she feared came to pass. The woman before her was named Preston. She usually disliked Loberlin and wished she could find a chance to swallow her alive. Loberlin desperately prayed in her heart, "Please don't see me. Just hurry and walk past." In the end, the other woman not only stopped, but even approached with a fake smile. Loberlin did not want to deal with her at all. She only wanted to quickly find an excuse to send her away, saying she was busy right now. But Preston was not willing to let such an opportunity pass. She stared at Loberlin's dress and began mocking her with a disgusted expression, saying she actually dared to wear such outdated, shabby rags out in public. Loberlin was stunned by what she heard. This woman was picking a fight far too obviously. Just then, Ian beside her finally spoke. He coldly uttered one word, "What?" In the original story, Preston was a typical villainess who found everyone unpleasant, especially Loberlin. However, she was also good at reading people. She did not dare provoke Cornelia, who was like a delicate butterfly, so she poured all her malice on a Loberlin instead. She picked fault with Loberlin from head to toe. She was clearly bullying her on purpose, yet she still had the nerve to say she was only telling the truth. That smug face was truly unbearable. Loberlin pointed to Ian beside her and introduced him, saying this was an earl who had come from afar to discuss a major business deal. Preston did not forget to brag either. She said her family had just secured the distribution rights for timber. Seeing that proud look on her face, Loberlin felt uneasy. But the more the woman talked, the more outrageous she became. She even said that to celebrate, the earl had ordered 3 sets of high-end formal dresses for her in one go. After hearing that, Loberlin only wanted to sneer. The boast was so absurd that even Ian beside her fell silent. Right now, Loberlin only wanted this woman to disappear from her sight as quickly as possible. Unexpectedly, Ian spoke up directly. His tone was full of disgust. "Since your father bought the dresses, you should go home and thank your father. What are you showing off here for?" Preston was completely stunned. She pointed at Ian for a long time, unable to speak, and could only force out, "How can you be so rude?" Ian gave a cold laugh, throwing a loud tantrum in public. "Is that your family's etiquette?" With just those few words, the situation instantly reversed. Preston, who had been so arrogant moments ago, was now completely unable to save face. Ian's move of giving her a taste of her own medicine was perfect. He deliberately pretended not to know her and asked who this Miss Whatever was. Preston was so angry she nearly jumped, shouting that she was Lady Preston and demanding that Ian show some respect. But Ian sneered and immediately threw the words back at her. "Since you were rude enough to address someone else that way first, I can only address you the same way." Seeing Ian press forward step by step, even saying he wanted to have a proper talk with her about etiquette, Preston finally panicked. All her earlier arrogance was gone. Knowing she was in the wrong, she could only turn and flee in embarrassment. Before leaving, she still did not forget to throw out a threat, saying she would absolutely not let him off. But seeing how miserable she looked, everyone knew just how badly she had lost this round. The troublemaker was finally gone. Ian complained with a look of disgust that this woman had a terrible temper and was simply a headache. Although Loberlin felt rather satisfied, she was still uneasy. This was no joke. If Ian's identity was exposed, there would be serious trouble. She could not help asking Ian why he had bothered arguing with that kind of person. Ian, however, looked completely matter-of-fact. Since the other party was spouting nonsense, why should he not talk back? Loberlin sighed and said she was a pacifist, better to avoid unnecessary trouble. But Ian was so angry he laughed. He looked at Loberlin and said, "That's new. When it comes to me, you certainly never run out of things to say." Now, it was Loberlin's turn to be speechless. It seemed her pacifism depended on the person. Ian put down his teacup and coldly brought up that dress shop. Loberlin hurriedly corrected him, saying the shop was called Daphne. Ian looked unconcerned. "Whatever it's called, is it really that impressive?" Loberlin sighed. Impressive was an understatement. Their current reservations were already booked until next year. But then she changed the subject and said it had nothing to do with her anyway. In truth, she was not being honest. In the past, when she saw Cornelia wearing dresses from that shop, she had indeed felt bitter. After all, those unbelievably expensive dresses were something she did not even dare dream of. Ian saw through her at once and directly asked, "If it has nothing to do with you, why are you bringing it up now?" Loberlin was instantly embarrassed. Some thoughts really could not be hidden. Ian finally told the truth. The reason he was curious about that shop was entirely because that red-haired woman had praised it to the skies in his ear. Loberlin froze for a moment after hearing that, then could not help correcting him. Lady Preston's hair was clearly green. Ian stood up with an indifferent expression. "Whether it's red or green, it has nothing to do with me." Since everything had been cleared up, it was time to go back. Loberlin watched his retreating back and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Although Preston had appeared at a terrible time, those rumors had finally turned into simple curiosity. For Loberlin, that was actually good news. Who would have thought that as the days passed, the person who most should have appeared, Crown Prince Ian, did not show even a shadow of himself? Loberlin stood on the balcony and was just about to sigh that life had finally become peaceful. If every day could be this stable, how wonderful would that be? But the moment that ominous thought arose, a maid hurriedly pushed open the door and rushed in, shouting for her to go to the drawing room at once. Seeing the maid looking so restless, Loberlin's heart also began to pound. What major incident had happened that required her to see in person? When she hurried to the drawing room and pushed the door open, she froze on the spot. What on earth was going on in this room? The entire room was filled with gorgeous formal dresses. Even that legendary top designer had personally come to her door. Jonathan greeted her with a smile and said it was his honor to serve the young lady. He also said someone had ordered 6 dresses in one go and had even spent a fortune to cut in line. Loberlin was completely confused. When had she ever ordered these clothes? It was only when the designer handed her a card and said it was a special surprise for her that the moment she opened the letter, Loberlin was utterly speechless. After all that fuss, the culprit behind everything turned out to be that man. In the letter, Ian's tone was arrogant, ordering Loberlin to gratefully put on the clothes he had sent. Loberlin was so angry, she tore the letter to pieces and cursed Ian as an arrogant bastard. Although the clothes were of very high quality, Loberlin was speechless over the nickname Ian had given Preston, green-headed monster, because Preston's hair was green to begin with. Buried in the pile of clothes, Loberlin began doubting her life. She felt that only she would ever know that man's true nature in this lifetime. Brian pushed the door open and came in, delivering the confidential documents Ian had requested. Brian asked in confusion, "Your Highness, why are you suddenly investigating timber contracts?" Ian took the documents. He wanted to see exactly what secrets the Preston family was hiding. Brian still did not understand why Ian had suddenly become interested in them. After all, this family had never had much of a relationship with the royal family. But Ian knew in his heart that the Queen's influence had probably already infiltrated them. In the past, for the sake of the bigger picture, Ian had always avoided directly clashing with the Queen. But now, because of that relative named Vigral, he had already decided to tear off all pretenses. Not to mention that woman had actually dared to use a false identity in the capital. This time, Ian absolutely would not sit back and do nothing. Ian flipped through the records in his hands and discovered that there were quite a few shady dealings inside. Clearly, someone in the middle had deliberately turned a blind eye. Ian sneered. Since the evidence was conclusive, they might as well take action directly. Brian casually mentioned that it was a pity about the dress shop called Daphne. Lady Preston's order had already been canceled, and their losses would not be small. Ian pretended not to care and replied, "That shop called Cannon, or whatever. Since it's so popular, the freed-up slot will be filled very quickly." Brian corrected him with a helpless look. "It's Daphne." He truly had not expected Ian to pay attention to such a small shop. Ian smiled without saying anything. Of course he knew that shop. After all, he had been keeping an eye on that woman all along. Brian flipped through the information in his hands and casually sighed. To be honest, a male designer this successful is quite rare in the circle. Ian did not react for a moment and asked what he was talking about. Brian continued explaining the designer from Daphne, that dress shop. As soon as those words came out, Ian was completely dumbfounded. That designer was actually a man. Not only was that mysterious designer male, he was also said to be handsome and especially charming in every movement. Ian could no longer sit still. Was this not inviting a wolf into the house? A man and a woman alone in the same room. What if something happened? The more he thought about it, the more wrong it felt. How was this making clothes? This was clearly someone coming to steal her away. Seeing Ian looking as if he wanted to devour someone, even Brian beside him was stunned. Was this reaction not a little too extreme? Ian was truly so angry he laughed. Since the other party wanted to compete in business, then there was no need for him to be polite. He pushed up his glasses, his eyes full of calculation. Since Preston had so much fighting spirit, he might as well make her lose completely, without giving her even the slightest chance to recover. Seeing his prince in such a crazed state, cold sweat broke out on Brian. How was this discussing business? This was clearly preparing to tear someone's house apart. Brian had originally only wanted to investigate some clues, but on the desk, he discovered something incredible. It was actually a portrait of Loberlin, and it was the kind of portrait that showed the whole family. How could such a private item appear in the Crown Prince's room? Brian froze completely. This made no sense at all. Could it be that Ian, that cold-blooded fellow, had actually fallen sincerely for Loberlin? Loberlin was now on the verge of collapse. She truly could not endure this kind of life for even one more second. Every day she faced those lace trims, ribbons, and fabrics, while her ears were filled with the designer's endless chatter. This needed to be thickened, that needed more lace. Listening to it made her head feel like it was about to explode. To hell with the schedule. To hell with the formal dresses. No matter who came today, it would not work. She was going on strike right now. She rushed straight out the front door and got into the carriage. Whatever the final product turned into, she did not care. Right now, she only wanted to get as far away from these rotten pieces of cloth as possible. This feeling of completely giving up was damnably sweet. Loberlin knew very well that today was no joke. According to the original plot, this street would soon become a sea of fire. This great fire would not only destroy this place, but also completely collapsed the finances of the entire empire. To fill this huge hole, the old emperor actually set his sights on Cornelia's dowry. He forced Ian to get engaged as soon as possible. To put it plainly, it was all for that bit of life-saving money. As a result, Ian poured all his resentment onto the innocent Cornelia. A marriage held hostage by money like that was doomed to be a tragedy from the start. Since Loberlin already knew the script, she absolutely could not allow history to repeat itself. True change had to begin now. Since she knew this place would catch fire in the future, she would first come to the scene and scout it out, seeing whether she could eliminate the hidden danger ahead of time. Just as she was observing her surroundings, a familiar figure suddenly entered her sight. Wait, why did that person look more and more familiar? Was that not the coachman from earlier? A man who should have been driving the carriage was now sneaking around the future side of the fire. There was definitely more to this. Loberlin suddenly remembered that Ian had once warned her the carriage accident had not been an accident at all, but a conspiracy deliberately aimed at Cornelia. It seemed this coachman was the key to unraveling the mystery. She absolutely could not let this clue slip away. Loberlin immediately followed him. Wait, was this not the 6th District? The place rumored to be the most chaotic and dangerous? It seemed the truth was hidden in these shadows. This place was gloomy and made her skin crawl. It was still not too late to turn back. But if she lost track of that coachman, all her previous efforts would be wasted. Before Loberlin could think it through, a crazed woman suddenly rushed out from the darkness and grabbed her tightly. The woman muttered wildly, shouting, "Did you bring it? Where's that thing?" This was bad. The madwoman had clearly mistaken her for someone else. The woman screamed like a lunatic, "Stop pretending to be stupid. Give it to me. Without it, I really will die." Loberlin desperately tried to break free, but the other woman's strength was absurdly great. Her grip clamped around Loberlin's arm like iron pincers, and she could not shake her off at all. Now she was truly in trouble. Being entangled by a madwoman in a hellish place like this, there would be no response no matter how she cried for help. At the most desperate moment, an unexpected visitor suddenly appeared from the shadows. Judging by his attire, he was probably no ordinary person. The mysterious man casually threw out a money pouch. "What you want is here." The madwoman pounced on it like a starving tiger and grabbed it, laughing wildly. While Loberlin was distracted, the mysterious man suddenly seized her and ordered in a low voice for her to follow him. His movements were so fast that she had no time to react. They had not gone far when the madwoman's heart-rending scream came from behind them. "You liar! I'll kill you!" Loberlin felt something was wrong. Sure enough, something had happened. Although she had shaken off that lunatic, the man in front of her who had taken her away was probably the real dangerous one. "Thank you. You just saved." Before Loberlin could finish, she was interrupted by the other party's soft laugh. "This is already the 2nd time I've saved your life." The man slowly took off his winter hat, and the face revealed beneath it was actually Crown Prince Ian's. Loberlin was completely stunned. "Your Highness? Why are you in a place like this?" Ian, however, asked first instead, "That is what I should be asking you. Why are you not staying properly on 4th Avenue? What are you doing running to a hellish place like this?" Loberlin's heart skipped. How did he know she had been on 4th Avenue? Could it be that he had been following her all along? Faced with her suspicion, Ian began seriously making excuses. He said he had come to investigate the poisonous herb trade and had merely saved her along the way, then asked whether he looked that idle. On the surface, Loberlin nodded in agreement, but in her heart, she knew very well that this fellow had absolutely followed her all the way from 4th Avenue. But compared to the stalking, that poisonous herb was clearly more concerning. Ian lowered his voice. "You have actually never heard of it? That thing is called Phelan's Demon. It is no joke. As long as someone touches even a little, they can instantly experience the greatest pleasure, but the price is that their body begins to wither from the inside out. There is no cure for this poison at all. Once addicted, there is no escape. It is poison from a demon through and through." Loberlin could not help asking, "Since it is so dangerous, why are you personally handling it, Your Highness, instead of handing it over to the guards to investigate?" Ian's answer was direct. "I do not trust them. The captain of the guards is very likely one of the Queen's people." As soon as those words came out, Loberlin's heart sank. He did not trust the Queen. It seemed the royal family's internal waters were even deeper than she had imagined. Before she could figure it out, Ian suddenly leaned in front of her. With that half-smiling expression, what exactly was he planning? Ian said in a low voice, "I have my reasons." Although Loberlin still had questions, she nodded. Since he did not want to say more, she would not ask. But before she could breathe a sigh of relief, Ian's tone tone suddenly became serious. More importantly, we need to hide first. As soon as he finished speaking, he pulled Loberlin into his arms. His movement was so fast that she could not react at all. This sudden action made the atmosphere instantly become somewhat subtle. But Ian's eyes were fixed tightly outside the alley. It seemed the real trouble had already caught up. Ian motioned for her not to make a sound. The two held their breath and hid tightly behind wooden crates. Just then, footsteps came from not far away. Several laborers walked while muttering under their breath. From their tone, they were clearly discussing some shady business. One of them lowered his voice and said, "I guarantee it. Phelan's demon is really inside." Loberlin's heart gave a violent jolt. That deadly poisonous herb was actually hidden in the warehouse right in front of them. It seemed they had stumbled into the thieves' den by accident. 2 guards would not be hard to deal with. The problem was whether there were still people hiding in the dark. Ian could not act freely right now. If Loberlin got hurt even slightly, that would be a major problem. He settled her in the shadows and quietly told her to hide well. The guards outside were still suspicious, always feeling that there was movement nearby. It seemed things had indeed been tense lately, to the point that even a small deal like this had to be guarded layer by layer. Loberlin whispered a reminder that these people were actually trafficking banned goods. Ian motioned for her not to speak for now. This place was even more chaotic than the rumors said. Just then, the other party suddenly lowered his voice and began asking about the supplier's background. Ian knew that truly crucial information had arrived. As long as they followed this lead, they would definitely be able to catch the big fish behind it. But now the situation completely spun out of control. Loberlin lunged too forcefully and directly pressed Ian down to the ground. Looking at the face so close to his own, Ian was not angry at all. Instead, he smiled and teased that this situation was indeed a little too exciting. Only then did Loberlin realize just how ambiguous their posture was. She hurriedly explained loudly that she had only been too absorbed just now and had not noticed such details at all. But that kind of explanation, at this moment, sounded somewhat like she was trying too hard to cover things up. The atmosphere instantly became delicate. Ian held Loberlin tightly and signaled for her not to make a sound no matter what. The footsteps outside were getting closer and closer. If they were discovered now, there would be serious trouble. The guard cursed as he searched this way, thinking it might just be a few rats. Just then, the guard suddenly stopped. He stared at the cabinet in front of him, and his tone became a little strange. He said the thing looked a bit wrong. His companion urged him from behind to take a closer look. Ian finally breathed a sigh of relief and quietly asked Loberlin whether she was hurt. Loberlin shook her head. Although she had indeed been frightened just now, what concerned her even more now was the awkward posture of the two of them squeezed together. The more she thought about it, the more wrong it felt. That designer had definitely done it on purpose, actually finding a chance to push her straight into Ian's arms. Once she got out of this, she would definitely settle accounts with that fellow properly. The guards outside finally walked away. Loberlin anxiously wanted to crawl out of the cabinet. Ian had just been about to remind her not to move recklessly, but he was still a step too late. There was a crisp crack, and Loberlin could not help crying out. Now they were in big trouble. After that crisp sound, the two of them crashed directly into each other. Their posture was as awkward as it could possibly be. Loberlin was completely dazed and had no idea how to react. Ian looked helpless and said he had already warned her not to move recklessly, yet they had still ended up falling into each other's arms. He had originally wanted to reach out and steady her, but unexpectedly, where his hand landed, made the situation even harder to explain. Loberlin could no longer hear any explanation. She only felt that the other party was taking advantage of her. The two argued in the narrow space like two children who had not grown up, and neither was willing to give an even half a step. In the end, reason prevailed. If they stayed like this any longer, neither of them would be able to keep their dignity. The two tacitly decided to withdraw quickly. This was truly a place they could not remain in for even one more second. At last, they had escaped with their lives. Loberlin let out a long breath. Thinking back on the scene, just now still made her shudder. The two walked side by side down the street, and the atmosphere finally eased a little. Ian looked at the sky and insisted on sending her home. Loberlin had intended to take a carriage back by herself, but the other party gave her no chance to refuse. He said that dressed in such a disguise, she would stand out too much walking alone. Watching Ian stride toward the carriage without looking back, Loberlin could only obediently follow behind him. In her heart, she secretly complained that the crown prince's temper was truly overbearing. It was simply an abuse of power. But after getting into the carriage, Loberlin's mood changed quickly. She mysteriously told Ian that although they had just barely escaped danger, the trip had definitely not been for nothing. Ian happened to be curious about what she could possibly have discovered. Loberlin smiled and took out a letter. This was key evidence. Ian was completely stunned. He had not noticed when Loberlin had actually learned to steal things in passing and gotten hold of that crucial letter. Loberlin, however, remained calm and said this was merely information she had picked up casually. Ian could no longer sit still and snatch the letter, using her status as a lady as an excuse. Loberlin could not help complaining, "I do not usually see you being this polite. Now you remember that I am a young lady?" Jokes aside, Ian's expression became unusually grave. He warned Loberlin with his eyes that she absolutely could not interfere in what came next. He would solve this mess alone. Loberlin agreed readily on the surface, but she had other plans in her heart. She suddenly mentioned Cornelia, which immediately put Ian on alert. He did not understand why she was bringing up someone else. In truth, Loberlin felt very uneasy. Too many dangerous things had happened recently, and the things Ian had said before always made her feel something was not right. There was probably an even bigger secret hidden behind all this. Could this matter really be related to the Queen? No matter how Loberlin thought about it, she could not understand. The Queen, who is rumored to be famous for her kindness, and who even treated her stepson, Ian, as her own, how could she be involved in such a conspiracy? Ian clearly did not want to dwell on this topic. There was a trace of impatience in his tone. At a time like this, she still had the leisure to worry about someone else. He reminded Loberlin that the one who had truly been in danger just now was herself. Instead of worrying about things that had nothing to do with her, she should first take care of her own safety. Especially, she should stop dragging Lady Cornelia into this. Loberlin, however, refused to back down. To her, Cornelia was her truest friend. Ian let out a cold snort after hearing that, and asked whether she had already regarded the other party as family. That tone did not sound quite right. Of course she had. Since childhood, Loberlin had secretly sworn that no matter who it was, if anyone dared to touch even a single hair on Cornelia's head, she would never forgive them in this lifetime. Back then, Cornelia had always shone into her life like a light, reaching out to pull her up. Loberlin had carved that friendship into her bones. Loberlin once again reaffirmed her stance. As long as she was there, no one could make Cornelia suffer even the slightest grievance. Ian sat opposite her and listened quietly. He did not understand why this woman could go this far, even risking her life for a friend. Strangely enough, however, looking at Loberlin's serious expression, Ian actually felt that gaze was not unpleasant at all. Instead, it made him somewhat unable to look away. The carriage finally arrived. Loberlin was preparing to get out and return home. She casually said goodbye, thinking they would leave things here for today. But Ian was clearly not right at this moment. He stared at Loberlin's departing back, hesitated for a moment, then could not help chasing after her and calling out to her loudly. Before Loberlin could react, she turned around, just about to ask what was wrong, when her wrist was suddenly seized by a powerful force, and her whole body froze in place. This time, Ian laid everything bare. He said in a low voice that he truly could not just let her leave like this. Loberlin completely stiffened. She could only brace herself and ask what exactly he intended to do. Ian then brought up the debt of saving her life, saying this account should be settled now. Loberlin thought she would have to accompany him for tea again. After all, in the middle of the night, aside from drinking tea, what else could they do? But Ian felt that was too boring. He wanted Loberlin to agree to one thing. Next time, she had to accompany him to 4th Avenue. Now, it was Loberlin's turn to be dumbfounded, because that was exactly where she wanted to investigate. Was this a coincidence, or had he already seen through everything? Loberlin knew very well that bringing the crown prince into this could only be beneficial. After all, once this man decided something, no one could make him turn back. Unexpectedly, Ian actually seemed a little lacking in confidence, and even probed by asking whether she really did not want to go. This time, Loberlin agreed decisively and set the time for late at night 5 days later. Watching her leave, Ian did not come back to his senses for a long while. Who would have thought that the dignified crown prince had just completely lost his composure while waiting for an answer? The Preston family had truly fallen this time. The fines alone were enough to make them suffer. Unfortunately, that old fox, Earl Wig, had cut off his tail to save himself in advance, so they failed to drag him down too. Ian, however, took it in stride. As long as that troublesome woman could stay quiet for a while, this move was not a loss. But just then, he suddenly changed the subject and told Brian to look at the thing on the table. Brian had not taken it seriously at first, but the moment he looked, he froze completely. On the table was the legendary Felin's demon. When exactly had this thing appeared here without anyone noticing? Ian was still joking about Brian's childhood. Brian hurriedly pulled the topic back on track. The flower in front of them was the real trouble. It had just been picked, so fresh it was abnormal. This poisonous herb originally only grew in damp, distant regions. To cultivate it on a large scale within the empire, there had to be a constant supply of water. Behind this, there must be a wealthy backer with astonishing financial power. Ian concluded that this was definitely not the work of the Queen's people, because for them, the cost was far too high. A mysterious third-party force had already infiltrated without anyone realizing it. Brian was still seriously planning to investigate the nobles. Ian agreed verbally, but his thoughts had long since flown far away. As soon as the bell rang, this man could not stay for even one more second and immediately strode out of the office. Brian was stunned behind him. What kind of appointment could make this workaholic so excited? Outside the palace, beside the carriage, Ian had already waited for quite a while and finally saw Loberlin hurrying over. It seemed that he had remembered the appointment from 5 days ago down to the minute. Loberlin hurried over, saying her family had received an urgent telegram. Her parents were returning to the country early, and they would also renegotiate the textile distribution rights. She herself was puzzled. The Preston family had clearly had it firmly in their grasp before, so why had the situation suddenly changed? Seeing her happy expression, Ian could not help muttering quietly beside her, "Why do you think the Dines couple suddenly came back? Do you really have no idea?" Loberlin did not hear clearly and wanted to ask again, but Ian hurriedly swallowed the words back. It seemed the heavy blow he had delivered behind the scenes yesterday was still completely unknown to this girl. In the carriage, Loberlin still wanted to discuss changing locations, but Ian's attitude was firm. He said he'd already made a reservation in advance. Loberlin was completely confused until she was brought to the entrance of this high-end formal wear shop. Only then did she realize that this man had actually brought her here to try on clothes. Ian urged her to hurry inside and stop dawdling. As soon as they entered, the shop owner, Madame Sabina, came forward to greet them and immediately called out Loberlin's name. Ian asked the owner whether everything had been prepared according to his requirements. Madame Sabina smiled brilliantly and said that every employee in the shop today was female. Loberlin still had not reacted to this setup when the shop owner began teasing them, saying she often saw husbands obsessed with spoiling their wives, wishing they could hide their wives away and keep all men from coming near them. Loberlin hurriedly waved her hands and said it was not like that at all. But the shop owner became even more excited and immediately changed her wording to ask whether they had just gotten engaged. Now it was completely impossible to explain. Madame Sabina gave her no chance to speak and came over with a measuring tape. It seemed that today, whether Loberlin wanted to try on the clothes or not, she would have to. To Loberlin, every second now felt like a year. How was this trying on clothes? This was practically entering a torture chamber. In her heart, she kept begging for someone to save her, but the culprit, Ian, was sitting leisurely on the sofa waiting. He even said that no matter how long it took, he did not mind. Right now, his mind was filled entirely with thoughts of what Loberlin would look like in a new dress. Just then, a newspaper on the table caught his attention. The headline on the front page clearly read, "The Maxwell Marquis family has finally found an heir." This family had made a great fortune through trade. Ever since the old Marquis died, because there had been no heir, the entire family had fallen into chaos. Now that this mysterious heir had suddenly appeared, it seemed the winds of society were about to change. The newspaper said that the title had ultimately fallen to a distant relative. Ian calculated in his heart that as long as the inheritance issue settled down, it would count as good news for the royal family as well. He had a feeling that he would soon be able to meet this mysterious new face at the investiture ceremony. Just then, Madame Sabina's voice came over, telling Ian to quickly turn around. She said the sight that came next would absolutely amaze him. Loberlin slowly walked out while lifting her skirt. She had never worn such gorgeous clothing in her life, and every part of her body felt uncomfortable. But when she appeared before Ian, the crown prince, who had been calmly analyzing the situation just moments ago, was now completely speechless. He froze in place, his eyes fixed on Loberlin without moving. It seemed the effect of this formal dress was even more exaggerated than he had expected. Ian could not help praising Madame Sabina's skill. The shop owner laughed so hard she could hardly close her mouth, saying this was hardly her credit. It was clearly because the bride-to-be had such an excellent foundation, so she had barely needed to do anything. Ian said nothing after hearing that. He simply stared at Loberlin. Suddenly, as if he had discovered some treasure, he asked the shop owner whether that could be bought together as well. Madame Sabina quickly nodded and praised His Highness for his excellent eye. Before Loberlin could react, Ian had already taken the item and walked over to her, telling her to try it on. Who would have thought that the dignified crown prince would actually kneel on one knee and personally put shoes on Loberlin? He said that he had taken a liking to this pair at first glance, and his mind had been filled with how she would look wearing them. Now Loberlin was completely stunned. Looking at the man before her, she did not know what to say for a moment. Ian's move was simply a textbook example of flirting. He said that the color of the shoes was exactly the same as Loberlin's eyes, so the moment he saw them, he felt they had practically been made for her. Who would not be moved by such a detail, when even the color of her eyes was remembered so clearly? Loberlin felt it was a bit wasteful. After all, the skirt was so long that no one could see what shoes she wore anyway. Ian would not listen to that. He domineeringly declared that since he had given them to her, she should obediently accept them. In his heart, Loberlin was the most noble young lady and absolutely could not be looked down on by anyone. This unfounded doting instead made Loberlin uneasy. She could not help wanting to ask clearly, what purpose was hidden behind this kindness that had come out of nowhere? Ian actually said there was no reason. He simply wanted to give them to her right now. But why did his wicked movements look more and more suspicious? Loberlin was so frightened, she hurriedly told him to stop. Ian, however, looked calm and even brought up old accounts, reminding her that something even more excessive had already happened. Was it not a bit too late to start feeling shy now? This scene happened to be seen clearly by the shop owner. Loberlin became so anxious she was incoherent, desperately trying to explain that it was not what everyone thought. But Ian, on the other hand, immediately began acting shamelessly. Since it could not be explained, she might as well call him a bastard. Ian's behavior was truly unmatched. He insisted on hearing Loberlin curse him once before he would stop, and even promised that as long as she cursed him properly, he would leave immediately. How could Loberlin dare agree? Publicly insulting a member of the royal family would get her arrested. She had not lived enough yet. But Ian directly began acting shamelessly again, saying that if she did not curse him, he would keep following her like this. What kind of crown prince was this? He was simply a clingy shadow. Loberlin was completely out of options and could only sulk there. But just then, Ian suddenly put away that frivolous expression and gently praised her, saying the shoes truly suited her. That direct hit instantly left Loberlin speechless. All her anger from earlier vanished. This crazy shopping trip finally ended. The shop assistants were all smiling so widely they could hardly close their mouths. After all, a major customer like the Crown Prince was not someone they saw many times in a year. Loberlin's mind was now filled entirely with the bill. How much money had this spending spree cost? And was it really all right for her to keep sticking close to the Crown Prince like this? She thought that after buying everything, she would be able to go home. But Ian showed no intention of letting her go. Instead, he asked in a relaxed tone where she wanted to stroll next. Before Loberlin could react, she heard someone shouting by the roadside that a trading company had just received goods from the new continent. Hearing the name of the trading company, Loberlin suddenly stopped. She remembered, in the original story, a terrible fire was about to happen here. The research materials in the warehouse, along with the newly arrived goods, would all be burned to ashes. This was the crucial moment. She absolutely could not allow the tragedy to repeat itself. Loberlin no longer cared about etiquette. She grabbed Ian's hand and pointed ahead, shouting, "Your Highness, hurry and come with me." Before Ian could react, he was dragged forward by that force. Why had this girl suddenly become so proactive? After rushing all the way there, Loberlin finally found the trading company. Seeing the busy laborers on the dock, she knew she had not found the wrong place. Ian followed behind her with a puzzled expression, thinking this girl had perhaps taken a fancy to some rare goods. After all, a merchant caravan of this scale was indeed hard to see in this area normally. Loberlin was seriously observing the situation, while Ian started acting improper again. He leaned over and said in a low voice that if she liked this kind of style, she might as well go directly to his private collection room to take a look. Those words sounded rather ambiguous. Who knew whether this crown prince's real intention was on the goods or on the person? Ian finally understood. This girl had hurriedly run over because she wanted to conduct some kind of surprise inspection. Loberlin's thoughts were completely on the workers right now. Watching them carry bundles of licorice one after another, she kept feeling that something was wrong. Just as she was about to move closer and find out. Before she could take a step, Ian grabbed her wrist. The crown prince's face was now full of displeasure, and he even called her by name, asking in an aggrieved tone why she had slipped away alone. Ian was truly hurt this time. He complained that Loberlin had not only failed to explain why she had brought him here, but had also treated him like air the entire time. Loberlin looked at his face and felt more and more that something was off. How was this the dignified crown prince? He was clearly a big dog throwing tantrum. She even thought of the golden retriever she had seen when she was young. Although it was large and looked fierce, once it started acting spoiled, there was truly no dealing with it. It seemed she had to quickly smooth down his fur. Loberlin directly used her ultimate move. She reached out and patted Ian's head, her tone so gentle it was unbelievable. She said the surroundings had been too noisy just now, so she had not heard him. Once this head-patting move came out, the crown prince, who had been angry a moment ago, instantly lost all his temper. This was bad. Now she was truly finished. Loberlin had felt satisfied while soothing him just now, but only after calming down did she realize that, according to royal etiquette, this was practically a grave offense. Loberlin was so frightened that she hurriedly withdrew her hand and apologized, afraid that she would be dragged off and locked up the next second. Fortunately, Ian finally relented. He turned his head away and said he would let it go this time. The two walked forward stiffly like that. Although they said they would put it behind them, the awkward atmosphere probably would not disappear for a while. Looking at the bundle of licorice in front of her, Loberlin was now completely certain. This was the crucial trigger. She turned her head and dropped a bomb on Ian, saying that within a week, something serious would definitely happen here. So could he allocate some funds first and strengthen the security here? Ian frowned as he listened. Mobilizing regular troops was no small matter. A report had to be written, and they would have to wait for the budget to be approved from above. It was very troublesome. But Loberlin had already dug a pit and was waiting for him to step into it. Since official procedures would not work, surely the crown prince's private guards could be of use. Ian directly refused, saying these guards were meant to protect him. They could not let him wander alone on dangerous streets, could they? Loberlin also understood that making this crown prince help for nothing would indeed not be easy. If that did not work, she could only go to Cornelia or Brian for help. But just as she was about to give up, Ian suddenly turned his head and asked what she intended to offer in exchange. As long as Loberlin could agree to his conditions, sending guards was not completely impossible to discuss. Now, it was Loberlin's turn to be confused. He was the crown prince. He had power and money. Among the few bargaining chips she held, what could possibly catch his eye? Ian's move was called taking advantage of someone's misfortune. He directly named his price. As long as Loberlin agreed to accompany him to the festival and granted him one additional request, he would help. Loberlin felt uneasy as she listened. Why was it the festival again, and she had to go with him? Ian, however, spoke righteously. Since rumors had already spread outside saying that they were practically guaranteed to be engaged, they might as well turn the false act real and perform a few more scenes. Was that not quite interesting? Loberlin did not find it fun at all. How was this acting? This was clearly pushing herself into a pit. Ian's push-and-pull tactic was extremely smooth. He directly threw out, "If you do not want to, forget it. At worst, we can pretend this never happened." Loberlin was incredibly conflicted. She clearly knew that the closer she got to this man, the more dangerous it was. But thinking of the fire that had yet to happen and Cornelia's lifelong fate, she still decided to risk it. Fina, I will accompany you to this one festival. This will not happen again. You must send people to watch for fire 24 hours a day. Absolutely nothing can go wrong. Ian nodded and smoothly held Loberlin's hand, saying unhurriedly, since married couple is unsuitable. How about lovers instead? Loberlin wondered if she had heard wrong. What did he mean by changing it to lovers? Was this progress not a little too fast? Ian said confidently that when a man and a woman went out alone late at night, if they were not husband and wife, then they were lovers. This logic was simply impossible to refute. Loberlin still wanted to struggle a little and asked whether they could change it to something like an elder-relative relationship. But she discovered that this fellow was clearly doing it on purpose. This time, she had truly been caught in his grasp. Ian even directly admitted that he had this wicked hobby. Seeing others unable to save face made him feel comfortable. Loberlin hurriedly drew a clear line between them and suggested that, publicly, they should simply say they were cousins. She then took the opportunity to bring up her real goal. She wanted him to use the Crown Prince's budget to prevent a fire that had not yet happened. Now it was Ian's turn to calculate. Based on a single sentence from her, she wanted him to empty his coffers, yet she would not even give him the status of a lover. No matter how he looked at this deal, he was the one losing out. Loberlin became truly anxious and began playing the emotional card, asking whether he was unwilling to help with even this small favor. She thought Ian would soften, but who knew his answer would be so decisive, blocking off the path completely? Now, even Loberlin herself felt this deal was indeed somewhat unreasonable. Just as she was preparing to accept defeat, the situation suddenly reversed. Ian actually nodded and agreed. However, the money would not be taken for nothing. He immediately proposed a wager. If no fire broke out within a week, Loberlin would have to sell herself into labor completely and obey him for the rest of her life. The moment Loberlin heard that, she became furious. How was this compensation? This was clearly an outrageous demand. She immediately decided she was not doing it. At worst, she would think of a solution herself. But before she could walk far, Ian hurriedly used his trump card. He said slowly that since they could not come to an agreement, the bill for the custom-made formal dresses would have to be sent to her family. This time, Loberlin froze completely. Those clothes were all outrageously expensive. If her family saw the bill, the consequences would be unimaginable. She was now stuck between a rock and a hard place. If she did not agree to Ian's request, that massive sum alone would crush her. This time, she had truly been calculated down to the bone. Loberlin had no moves left. Getting entangled with someone like Ian was simply asking for trouble. She gritted her teeth and agreed. Now the two of them had officially reached an agreement. Although she was unwilling 100 times over in her heart, things had already come to this. She could only choose to believe in the direction of the original plot, and in the unfathomable man before her. Just as this side had finalized the deal, Brian was not idle either. He was frantically handling all kinds of confidential documents and had even set his sights on the account books of the major families. He would not let the slightest disturbance pass. Just after dismissing his subordinate, there was movement outside the door. The one who pushed the door open and came in was Ian. Seeing him humming a little tune, it was obvious he had encountered something good. Brian could tell at a glance that the Crown Prince was in an unusually good mood. Before he could ask, Ian directly issued an order. He planned to place his own guards directly at the trading warehouse. Seeing this decisive momentum, it seemed he was preparing to take real action. Brian was not so easily fooled. He directly questioned Ian, asking why he suddenly wanted to transfer guards to the trading warehouse. Ian still tried to make an excuse, saying the weather had been too dry recently and he was afraid the warehouse might accidentally catch fire. But Brian exposed him on the spot and insisted that he give the real reason. Seeing that he could not hide it anymore, Ian simply laid his cards on the table. He said that he had already made a deal with Loberlin. Hearing this name, Brian froze completely. He never expected that these two people had already met privately. Brian's heart was now in turmoil. To him, Ian was the lord worthy of his wholehearted loyalty. That loyalty would never change in this lifetime. But unfortunately, Loberlin was also involved. When Brian was young, he was a freak in other people's eyes. The children nearby whispered among themselves, saying he was just a mute gourd. No matter how others took the initiative to talk to him, he could not squeeze out even a single word. One child raised a book. Should I hit him with this? Then he'll react, right? Another child asked, are you serious? Those little brats were getting more and more outrageous. While jeering, they actually threw the book straight at him. At that critical moment, a pair of hands caught the book firmly. No one had expected Loberlin to rush out. Furious, she loudly demanded to know what they thought they were doing. With so many of them bullying one person, did they not feel ashamed? This time, those troublemakers were struck speechless. The adults also heard the commotion and hurried over. Loberlin quickly ran over to complain, explaining every single thing those people had done. After hearing it, the madam's expression changed at once. Without another word, she grabbed those troublemakers and dragged them out. At last, the study became quiet again. Before leaving, the madam even gave a stern warning that those people would never be allowed to set foot in here again. Loberlin quickly told Brian the good news, wanting him to feel completely at ease. Brian lowered his head and answered quietly. It seemed that the farce just now had truly hurt him. Loberlin mentioned Cornelia. During the hardest time for her, Cornelia had been the only person willing to reach out and help. Cornelia was not only beautiful, she was also unbelievably kind. She had taken the initiative to become friends and told Loberlin that she only needed to be herself and did not need to change for anyone. Those words completely changed Loberlin. She decided that from then on, she would live with her head held high. Now she brought that strength to Brian. She said that no matter what those people had said earlier, in her eyes, Brian was steady and sensible, so he should have more confidence and stop letting those words hurt him. After listening, Brian stayed silent for a long while. Then, he cautiously tested the waters and asked, so, do you mean you want to be friends with me too? Loberlin did not react at once. She had only meant to comfort the child and had not expected him to ask so directly. Seeing Brian's serious expression, Loberlin simply agreed frankly. How could I possibly not want to be friends with someone as outstanding as you? The moment those words left her mouth, Brian froze completely. He gripped the corner of his clothes tightly. This was the first time someone had chosen him so firmly. Brian mustered his courage and greeted her solemnly. It is a pleasure to meet you. Who could have imagined that the small promise back then would continue for so many years? From immature children to adults standing side by side, to Brian, Loberlin was the greatest blessing in his life, more important than anyone else. Brian blocked the Crown Prince's path. He no longer intended to remain silent and decided to lay everything bare. Word by word, he asked, Your Highness, what exactly are your feelings for Lady Loberlin? Ian clearly had no intention of being polite and directly threw the question back at him, asking what he meant by that. Brian did not back down one step. He said bluntly that Loberlin was his closest friend. If the Crown Prince only wanted to play around, then this matter would not be so simple. Ian directly stopped the conversation. He smiled and praised Brian, saying he was indeed loyal enough as a friend. Then he patted Brian on the shoulder and told him to relax, because what he said next left Brian speechless on the spot. Ian personally admitted that his feelings for Loberlin were absolutely not a joke. The stir Ian had caused recently had even alarmed the Emperor. The Emperor flipped through the newspaper while smiling from ear to ear. He loudly praised Ian, saying this move had been played beautifully. In particular, sending guards to the trade association was clearly something he had planned in advance. However, the headlines in the newspaper were not so pleasant. Late-night arson, heroic rescue from the fire. The wording was full of suspicion, questioning what exactly the Crown Prince was scheming behind the scenes. Facing these rumors, Ian appeared very calm. The atmosphere at the dining table seemed peaceful, but in truth, everyone's words carried hidden meaning. Ian first politely thanked the Emperor for his praise. Queen Camilla, seated at the side, spoke up. On the surface, she was expressing relief that the fire had been stopped, but in reality, she was questioning Ian, saying that if his prediction had been wrong, then he would have been wasting the nation's money. Ian did not panic at all. He made things clear directly, saying that sending troops had not been to prevent a fire at all, but because of a certain rumor. Camilla clearly had not reacted yet. What rumor could make the Crown Prince mobilize such a large force? Ian finally dropped the bombshell. A deadly poison called Phelan's Demon was quietly spreading through the capital. This was no joke. The emperor could no longer sit still. Such major news, and Ian had actually kept it hidden without reporting it. Ian explained that he had long since sent people to keep watch over the trade route. Being able to stop the fire last night had merely been a fortunate side benefit. Seeing that his son had such firm judgment, the emperor said he felt reassured, yet immediately took back command authority. He would personally send people to take over 4th Avenue and have all of Ian's private soldiers withdraw. Ian said nothing more and simply lowered his head to accept the order. Queen Camilla said nothing. The atmosphere in the room became unbearably oppressive. No one could guess what she was thinking now. Ian turned and left expressionlessly. He looked as steady as a mountain, but inside, his emotions were already in turmoil. He never would have imagined that the fire would really happen. There had even been a kidnapping incident along with it. Everything had been predicted by that woman. How was this good luck? It was practically divine prophecy. Ian's mind was now filled with one question. Just who exactly was that woman named Loberlin? Ian knew very well that although Queen Camilla disliked him, she had truly still been kept in the dark about the poison. Since the situation had already stabilized, it was time to reward the greatest contributor to this operation. Ian was in an excellent mood and immediately offered a generous reward. He proposed going to the most famous tailor shop to order 20 splendid dresses for Loberlin. Cornelia noticed at once that Loberlin's state seemed very off and quickly asked what was wrong. Loberlin shook her head. She said she kept having an ominous feeling, as though something major was about to happen. In response, Cornelia produced a bowl of snacks and enthusiastically recommended them, saying they were the most popular popcorn from the other side of the continent, fried with butter and unbelievably fragrant. Seeing Cornelia's carefree appearance, Loberlin could only set aside her worries for the moment and take a bite. Cornelia had recently been busy helping her parents manage their territory and could not spare any time. If she had not used preparing for the banquet as an excuse, they might not even have had the chance to meet today. Cornelia wanted to take this opportunity to chat more and say everything on her mind. But that was exactly what Loberlin wanted. She had been waiting for this chance, preparing to guide the conversation toward her true goal. Loberlin warmly took Cornelia's hand and said she really wanted to know how Cornelia had been doing lately. But Cornelia suddenly changed the subject and stared at Loberlin, asking what was going on with the crown prince. That question immediately stumped Loberlin. She quickly laughed it off, saying nothing had happened at all. But Cornelia looked suspicious and clearly did not believe her. Loberlin looked at the newspaper on the table. So that fire had really happened. Fortunately, everyone ended up safe. At least now she would not have to become that person's subordinate. Cornelia came closer with the newspaper. She asked Loberlin if she had seen the latest news. Now the entire social world was discussing one person, the soon-to-inherit Marquis, Maxwell, shown in the newspaper. Loberlin found it a little strange. Wasn't inheriting a title perfectly normal news? Cornelia shook her head. She said that position had been vacant for too long. So now that someone had suddenly taken it over, of course everyone could not sit still. The Maxwell family's wealth was indeed enough to rival a nation's. But the reason the newspapers could not stop discussing him was probably because this new Marquis was simply too handsome. Loberlin could not help teasing Cornelia, asking whether this man was exactly her type. Cornelia quickly waved her hands, explaining that all the young ladies in the city were trying to flirt with him right now. Not only was he good-looking and wealthy, even his character and talent were said to be perfect. Loberlin had no intention of letting her off and pressed her, asking what Cornelia thought of him. Cornelia hesitated for a moment before saying, "He is handsome. He really is quite handsome." Loberlin was very open-minded about it. She felt this Marquis had nothing to do with her, so she did not take it to heart at all. After hearing that, Cornelia giggled and teased her, saying that was because Loberlin already had someone more important in her heart. Loberlin immediately grew flustered and quickly denied that it was anything like that. Cornelia did not keep teasing her. She only reminded her that this banquet was originally meant to welcome that Marquis, so they would definitely meet him then. There would be no avoiding it. Loberlin sighed. Now she could only hope the other party was someone easy to talk to and that nothing would go wrong. The day of the banquet finally arrived. Magnificent carriages lined up to enter, and the entire palace entrance was bustling. Ian had already changed into his most formal attire and stood there without saying a word. Maximilian suddenly called out to him from behind, asking if he was waiting for someone. It was as if his thoughts had been exposed. Ian quickly turned around and stubbornly said there was no such thing. Maximilian sat on the sofa and looked at his older brother's unusual behavior, only giving a soft response and asking no further. For a moment, Ian did not know what to say and could only stand there awkwardly. He picked up a piece of candy from a nearby jar and muttered, "You are still just a child, after all." He handed the candy to Maximilian and asked with a smile, "Didn't you like these mint candies the most?" This move worked as expected. The stiff atmosphere in the room softened at once. Ian told him to eat something before the banquet began, so he would not have an empty stomach. Maximilian froze. But at that moment, his mother's voice suddenly echoed in his mind. His mother had once warned him through gritted teeth that Ian hated them to the bone and would eliminate both of them sooner or later. On one side was the terrifying demon his mother described. On the other was the gentle older brother before him, handing him candy. Maximilian's heart was now in utter confusion. Ian noticed something was wrong and asked with concern what had happened and whether Maximilian felt unwell. Maximilian lowered his head and quietly said he was fine. But just as Ian was about to leave, he suddenly reached out and gripped the corner of his brother's clothes tightly. Who could have expected Maximilian to take the initiative and ask Ian whether he wanted to share a piece of candy? This left Ian completely at a loss. After all, in the past, this had been their little secret. As long as the nanny did not discover them, they could sneak as many sweets as they wanted. Seeing the child's cautious expression, Ian did not know how to respond for a moment. Could the situation now still return to what it had once been? In the end, Ian did not refuse. He took the candy and sat down beside Maximilian. After holding back for a long time, the little boy finally found a topic and said that the way Ian had fought the fire before had been incredibly cool. Ian smiled after hearing this. He stroked Maximilian's head and said that if he could set a good example for him, then his efforts had not been wasted. Maximilian truly brightened up at this. Without even thinking, he loudly agreed. Seeing how happy he was, the relationship between the two finally stabilized somewhat. After awakening the memories of her previous life, this was Loberlin's first time attending a royal banquet of this level. The scene was indeed grand. Everywhere were nobles raising glasses and exchanging toasts. Everywhere there was wine. Loberlin secretly swore that she would not touch a drop of alcohol tonight. She absolutely could not repeat the same mistake. But on closer thought, something about it was strange. Back then, she had only drunk one glass. How could she have blacked out so completely? In the past, whenever strange men approached Cornelia, she had always been the first to rush forward and drive away all those ill-intentioned fellows. Now it seemed that the wine back then had probably not been simple. There was more to this than met the eye. Rumors were flying everywhere at the banquet. Several noble women hurriedly avoided one person as though avoiding a plague. Apparently, that man Beller had dirty hands and often secretly added things to other people's drinks. Hearing this, Loberlin finally understood. No wonder she had inexplicably blacked out back then and been manipulated like a puppet. So it had all been that bastard's dirty work behind the scenes. She absolutely could not let this debt go. Right under Loberlin's nose, Beller was actually adding something to wine again. Harming her had not been enough. Now he wanted to find another target. This bastard really never stopped. Loberlin could not sit still. Before the evidence disappeared, she had to rush over and catch him red-handed. But before she could say a word, a large hand suddenly covered her mouth tightly from behind. Who could have expected that the one stopping her at this critical moment would be Crown Prince Ian? The moment Ian spoke, Loberlin nearly laughed from anger. He actually asked whether trash like Beller was her type. Loberlin hurriedly denied it, but Ian did not believe her at all. If she did not like him, why had she been staring at him so intently? Now she really could not clear her name, even if she jumped into a river. Unfortunately, their tussling happened to be seen by someone passing by. Loberlin's mind went blank. She casually found an excuse and tried to slip away, but Ian's hand still had no intention of letting go. Now Loberlin panicked completely. If what had just happened turned into gossip, the entire social world would explode. But Ian did not take it seriously at all. He even wanted to solve the trouble in his own way. Terrified, Loberlin quickly begged him to stop, afraid this dangerous man would make things even more uncontrollable. Loberlin noticed a detail everyone else had overlooked. Regarding the witness's appearance, everyone seemed to remember it incorrectly. Only she remembered it clearly. A bold plan began to form in her mind. Should she simply test it? Loberlin suddenly threw out several dangerous questions. She asked Ian to describe what she looked like. Ian made it clear at once. "You are still wearing the shoes I gave you. Why are you pretending not to know now?" Ian warned Loberlin to stay away from that Beller, saying the man's character was utter garbage. But Loberlin's next sentence instantly ignited Ian like a powder keg. She said that she had once been harmed by that man and lost something most precious. That did it. Ian's anger instantly exploded, and he declared that he would settle accounts with the man right now. Loberlin was so frightened that she quickly hugged him from behind. If he really made a move, things would blow up completely. In order to stop Ian from going berserk, Loberlin quickly brought up Cornelia as a shield, emphasizing that someone had been with her the whole time and that the other party had definitely not taken advantage of her. This move worked. Ian, who had been murderous just moments ago, finally calmed down a little, but he was still worried. After all, the other person's status was what it was. Even if he was a complete scumbag, he was still powerful and influential. Ian gave an absolute order. From now on, she was never allowed to meet that man alone. Loberlin could only obediently nod. For the moment, the matter was finally put aside. Loberlin knew very well that Ian was right. As the daughter of a viscount, she had no standing to clash directly with Beller. She had originally sworn in her heart that she would only keep an eye on that scumbag from afar and absolutely not confront him head-on. But who could have expected the slap in the face to come so quickly? The moment she turned around, the two of them ran straight into each other. Beller started cursing in public. She had finally managed to shake off Ian. That man had almost caused a scene at the banquet just now, insisting on dealing with Beller himself. He really gave her no peace of mind. Where was Cornelia? Logically, Cornelia should have arrived by now. But when Loberlin turned her head, she froze on the spot. Beller was pestering Cornelia and urging her to drink. Loberlin recognized at a glance that this glass of wine was exactly the same as before. Now things were truly about to go wrong. At that critical moment, Loberlin rushed straight forward. With a sharp crash, the wine glass shattered to pieces. Beller was completely stunned. What on earth was this woman doing? Loberlin quickly smoothed things over, saying she had been too excited to see her friend and accidentally bumped into him. She thought she could fool him, but Beller stared at her for a long time before suddenly asking, "You are for the Dines family, aren't you?" Loberlin had never expected this man to have such a good memory. He had clearly been staring at Cornelia the whole time, yet he still remembered who she was. At the critical moment, Cornelia stepped directly in front of Loberlin. Her tone was as cold as ice as she warned Beller to speak with respect. After all, Loberlin was her best friend. Before Beller could react, Cornelia dealt another blow. She even refused his invitation to dance and left with Loberlin without looking back. Watching the two of them leave, Beller now hated Loberlin completely, thinking that all of this was her doing behind the scenes. It seemed this grudge was only growing deeper. The two finally escaped. Cornelia was still frightened and said that Beller had kept touching her earlier and had even tried to force her to drink. Loberlin quickly warned her that there was something unclean in that man's wine and that she must stay far away from him in the future. Seeing how innocent her dear friend was, Loberlin began making plans in her heart. If there were a reliable man protecting Cornelia, how could scum like that ever set their sights on her? She could not help testing the waters and ask Cornelia what kind of person she liked. But Cornelia had not awakened to romance at all and had no thoughts on the matter. It seemed being a matchmaker would not be easy. Cornelia was far too carefree. She actually thought marriage could simply be arranged by her parents. The moment Loberlin heard that, she grew anxious. How could that be acceptable? She grabbed Cornelia's hand and told her very seriously that marriage was a lifelong matter of her own, and that she had to find someone who could make her happy. But after listening, Cornelia actually smiled brightly and said, "Then I want to marry Loberlin." Loberlin froze on the spot. Cornelia rushed over and hugged her, saying that as long as she saw Loberlin smile, she felt happiest. Although this confession was touching, Loberlin still had to pull her back to reality. After all, this was a matter that concerned her entire life. Cornelia was still laughing and teasing her, but Loberlin's heart was pounding uneasily. Could this girl possibly be serious? Just then, the hall suddenly fell silent. The guards pushed open the heavy doors, and the members of the imperial family officially entered. The emperor, the queen, and the princes slowly walked in under everyone's gaze. People around them began whispering, saying Ian's gaze seemed to have been fixed in this direction the whole time. Loberlin felt it too. That gaze was indeed aimed at her. Now there was no avoiding it. The emperor stood above them and told the subjects below to raise their heads. Immediately afterward, the master of ceremonies announced the next guest to enter. This was the new head of the Maxwell family, Cedric. The moment he appeared, every gaze in the room was instantly drawn to him. Cornelia below was stunned and whispered to Loberlin that he looked even more handsome in person than in his portrait, and that he carried an indescribable air of mystery. Cedric knelt on one knee before everyone and offered the emperor his most sincere oath, declaring that he would be forever loyal. The emperor was very satisfied with him and announced on the spot that he accepted his oath, formally appointing him as the new Marquis of the Maxwell family. Thunderous applause instantly erupted below. Cedric behaved very calmly and politely thanked the emperor. His bearing did not resemble a newcomer at all. At that moment, Crown Prince Ian also took the initiative to step forward and congratulated the new Marquis with a smile. Who could have expected that this newly appointed Marquis was actually a major business owner behind the scenes? He said he wanted to apologize in person regarding the trade association. Ian was somewhat surprised by this. He had always thought that the trade association was just a small business run by commoners. He had not expected the mastermind behind it to be standing right before him. Cedric explained that because his health was usually poor, he had always had his steward appear publicly while he himself stayed behind the scenes and managed everything. He asked Ian how he had known in advance that a fire would break out. Ian did not answer directly, only revealing a mysterious smile. Beller suddenly caused trouble in front of everyone, accusing Loberlin of deliberately opposing him and saying she was only pretending to be ignorant. Loberlin had just been about to explain that it was a misunderstanding, but the other party refused to listen. He even laid hands on her in public, grabbing her wrist tightly. Seeing Loberlin being bullied, Ian, standing nearby, could no longer sit still. How could he tolerate such anger? He was about to rush forward to save her. At the critical moment, Brian stopped him. He reminded Ian that countless eyes were watching right now. If he clashed with Beller at this moment, it would give the queen a perfect chance to strike back. It would be more appropriate to leave this kind of situation to him. Loberlin struggled desperately and shouted for the other party to let go. But Beller had completely lost his mind and did not care whether she was in pain. The scene descended into chaos. No one had expected Beller to dare act so recklessly at the banquet. Since things had already reached this point, Loberlin decided she would no longer remain silent. She would expose in public the filthy things Beller had done back then. Seeing Loberlin being harassed, Ian pushed through the crowd and rushed over. Loberlin panicked completely. She knew Ian wanted to save her, but if the crown prince became involved in this scandal in public, his position might not be secure. At this critical moment, someone no one expected appeared. Cedric gracefully wrapped an arm around Loberlin. His tone was calm, yet carried an unquestionable pressure as he said he would have to interrupt. The entire room fell silent. Who could have expected that the one to step forward and save the beauty in the end would be this unfathomable Marquis? This important figure normally lived in seclusion and never involved himself in the messy affairs of social gatherings. But now, not only had he appeared, he had even protected Loberlin in his arms in front of everyone. The Marquis signaled to Loberlin not to worry, saying he would handle what came next. Now Loberlin was completely stunned. She had no connection to him whatsoever. So why would he take this risk to help her? Before everyone could recover, the true main event arrived. The emperor actually appeared in person. He looked coldly at the chaos before him and demanded to know what was going on. The atmosphere instantly froze. The Marquis directly lodged a complaint in front of everyone, saying Beller had used force against Loberlin and that everyone present had seen it. Beller panicked and quickly bit back, saying he had been protecting her, while accusing Loberlin of deliberately causing trouble. Just as he desperately tried to argue, the Marquis took out a small red bottle and coldly asked whether he recognized what it was. Seeing the bottle, Beller completely lost his composure. He could barely speak coherently. The Marquis began explaining in front of everyone that this was no ordinary sleeping aid, but a banned substance from the new continent. If used properly, it could be medicine. If used improperly, it could be a tool for murder. At best, it would cause a person to briefly lose memory. At worst, it could kill them outright. Most importantly, the Marquis stared at Beller and said he had heard that someone had recently been using this substance specifically against young women. With those words, Beller's foxtail was finally stepped on in public. The Emperor asked the key question: what did this have to do with today's disturbance? The Marquis directly revealed the truth. This was why Loberlin had knocked over the glass, because Beller had been holding this shameful drug. Beller became completely desperate and shouted that even if there was medicine, it was a legitimate prescription. But this time, he had run into a wall. The Marquis sneered and said his family managed all-import business for this drug, and the accounts were recorded clearly. Beller had secretly bought it through an agent. Moreover, whenever Beller attended a gathering, noble young ladies would always mysteriously faint. No one in the Empire had ever seen this drug before. Beller was the only one who possessed it. Now the evidence was conclusive. Even if he had 100 mouths, he could not deny it. The Emperor directly confronted Beller and asked whether it was true. Had he actually dared to use such vicious means against noble young ladies? Beller stammered for a long time, unable to piece together even a complete sentence. At that moment, Loberlin stepped forward on her own and said she had seen Beller secretly add something to the wine glass with her own eyes. These words were like a bomb, causing the entire hall to erupt instantly. The Emperor was truly furious now. To think someone dared do such filthy things inside the palace. He directly ordered Beller to be locked in the dungeon. Beller was completely dumbfounded. As he was forcibly dragged away by the guards, he continued shouting that he had been wronged. Unfortunately, no one would believe his nonsense now. A perfectly good banquet had nearly been ruined. The Emperor soothed everyone and told them to continue enjoying themselves, saying the imperial family would thoroughly investigate the rest. At last, things became quiet again. That kind of garbage would never again have a chance to come out and harm people. Loberlin thanked the Marquis, saying it was all thanks to him that this crisis had been completely resolved. The Marquis, however, behaved very calmly. To him, protecting a lady was only his duty. Loberlin was just planning to slip away. Since the ball had already begun, this was the best chance to quietly leave the hall without anyone noticing. But before she could turn around, the Marquis called out to her. He moved very quickly. With a smile, he invited her and asked whether she would be willing to dance this piece with him. Loberlin froze completely. Her originally perfect escape plan was now thoroughly ruined. She never would have imagined that the Marquis would seek her out at a time like this. Although the ball was lively, Crown Prince Ian's mood was terrible to the extreme. He had just watched Loberlin fall into danger with his own eyes, yet he had been unable to do anything. Just then, the Emperor approached and insisted that Ian take a partner and dance. Ian knew very well that this was meant to stir up family relations. But to him, as long as it benefited the imperial family, it did not really matter whom he danced with. Since the Emperor personally stepped forward to persuade him, even if Ian was unwilling, he had to give him that much respect. No one expected the usually aloof crown prince to actually enter the dance floor. The entire banquet hall instantly exploded with excitement. Everyone was guessing the identity of his female partner. Loberlin, who was also on the dance floor, noticed the commotion. Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt that something was wrong. Ian was actually dancing with another woman, and that woman was not Cornelia. The Marquis noticed her abnormal reaction and asked softly about it. Loberlin quickly gathered her thoughts and pretended nothing had happened. But this unexpected scene had completely thrown her off balance. In the past, at banquets, she had always been the one charging forward, helping Cornelia block those annoying flies and drinking all the wine along the way. She had practically been the perfect knight protecting a flower. But now she had become the focus of the dance floor, and with the Marquis, no less. The contrast was simply too great. Although she kept reminding herself that this was only to repay a favor and absolutely had no other meaning, she had to admit that the Marquis's face was truly lethal. If she looked at him for too long, her mind almost stopped working. The two continued dancing like this, and the atmosphere was so awkward she wanted to crawl into a crack in the ground. After holding back for a long time, Loberlin finally quietly said, "Thank you." Unexpectedly, the Marquis answered quite simply, saying there was no need to take it to heart, because he had achieved his own purpose as well. The Marquis openly admitted that he had gone to such lengths precisely so he could dance with Loberlin. As soon as he finished speaking, he actually lowered his head and placed a kiss on the back of Loberlin's hand. Loberlin was completely stunned. She had originally thought this was only repaying a favor. But with the other party acting so serious, what exactly was he planning? This scene happened to be witnessed clearly by Ian nearby. He froze on the spot, unable to say a single word. The Marquis was truly on another level. He looked at Loberlin and praised the way she had stood against Beller earlier, saying it had been incredibly impressive. He said that anyone else would have run away long ago, yet only she dared to step forward at that moment. Who would not be dazed by such affirmation? Loberlin still wanted to be modest and say she had only done it to protect her friend, but the other party immediately delivered another direct compliment. Now she had no defense at all. Facing this level of attack, staying calm was simply too difficult. Loberlin was praised until she did not know how to respond. She quietly said she was not very used to hearing such words, but the Marquis actually seized the opportunity. He smiled and said that he liked this honest side of her, and that this was only the beginning. Immediately afterward, he suddenly drew even closer, and the movements of his hands became increasingly bold. He said he wanted to understand her more deeply, as long as she was willing to give him the chance. Loberlin froze completely in place. Was this really dancing? This was practically playing with fire in front of everyone. Taking advantage of the gap between songs, Loberlin quickly found an excuse and slipped out. The high-pressure atmosphere from earlier had been so intense that if she stayed any longer, she really would not be able to handle it. Thinking of what the Marquis had said before leaving, she still felt uncertain. What did he mean by being very interested in her? That direct approach was far too strong. But after calming down and thinking carefully, the Marquis was definitely an expert. Those seemingly frivolous actions earlier were probably all intentional. How could there be so many coincidences in the world? He had clearly dug the pit long ago and was just waiting for her to jump into it. Still, she had to admit that a man like the Marquis was indeed a heartthrob. Even saying thank you seemed so charming when he did it. No wonder all the young ladies in the city had fallen for him. Loberlin now only wanted to quickly find Cornelia. This ball was far too exhausting. She was just planning to find somewhere quiet to hide when she turned her head and saw the scene she least wanted to see. Ian was actually dancing with another woman, and his movements, his gaze, were completely different from his usual self. How had the usually restrained crown prince suddenly become so abnormal? That Miss Spencer did indeed have a powerful background. No matter how cold Ian was, he could not simply dismiss her casually. But watching them stand together, Loberlin felt that something was wrong. This feeling was truly terrible. Clearly, as long as those two got engaged, all the trouble should come to an end. But why did she feel even worse now? Fine, she really could not stay in this place anymore. She might as well go outside for some air. As long as she did not see it, she could pretend none of this had happened. The moment she saw who had come, she froze completely. It was actually Ian. Ian lowered his voice and said, "Don't worry. No one saw me come this way." Loberlin asked in confusion, "That is not the point. Why is your highness here?" He had just been surrounded like a star in the dance hall, yet now he had followed her here secretly. What exactly did he want? Ian looked truly frightening now. Without any explanation, he walked forward and ordered forcefully, "Give me your hand." Before Loberlin could react, her hand had already been gripped tightly by him. Just as she thought some conflict was about to happen, Ian suddenly fell silent for a long time. He looked at that hand and asked quietly, "Does it still hurt? I am sorry I cannot help you then." Who could have expected that this usually high and mighty crown prince had been thinking about such a small injury all along? Now it was Loberlin's turn to be completely stunned. Loberlin quickly waved her hand and said it was fine. She knew His Highness had wanted to help back then, but that kind of occasion truly made it inconvenient to act, so he must not feel guilty. The more she spoke, the more incoherent she became. To break the awkward atmosphere, she simply changed the subject and asked, "More importantly, is it really all right to leave Miss Spencer alone over there?" Ian calmly asked in return, "Why would there be a problem?" Loberlin blurted out anxiously, "Weren't you just dancing with her?" But Ian was not angry. Instead, he revealed a meaningful smile. He asked softly, "So you were watching me the whole time?" Now she was in trouble. She had wanted to find an excuse to divert his attention, but instead, he had caught her weakness. Ian said the dance earlier had been ordered by the Emperor, and he had not wanted to dance at all. He even complained that the other party's dress color was too ugly and that he had only wanted to escape quickly. Loberlin asked suspiciously, "If you disliked it so much, why did you even remember the color of her dress incorrectly?" Ian answered confidently, "Because I did not care at all." Before Loberlin could react, Ian suddenly changed the subject, his tone becoming unusually serious. "What exactly is your relationship with that Marquis?" This question stunned Loberlin. Before she could speak, Ian added, "Judging by your expression, even if there really was something, you would rush to deny it, wouldn't you?" Loberlin froze on the spot. He had clearly been the one explaining himself, so how had it somehow become her being interrogated? This reversal was far too quick. Loberlin said that she had only met that Marquis today and that there was absolutely no relationship between them. Just like His Highness and that young lady, they were perfectly innocent. After hearing this, Ian fell silent for a moment, as though judging whether her words were true. Finally, he said softly, "Fine, let's say what you said is true." But before Loberlin could breathe a sigh of relief, Ian suddenly moved closer, his tone becoming very serious. "Since you are single now, should you not give me a chance as well?" Now it was Loberlin's turn to be speechless. She had only wanted to clear up the misunderstanding, but instead, she had dug a huge pit for herself. The atmosphere instantly became completely different. Since the mood had reached this point, Ian directly took Loberlin's hand. On this quiet terrace, the two of them actually began to dance. Compared with the social obligations in the hall earlier, Ian murmured that this feeling was what truly felt natural. Immediately afterward, he said something that caught her completely off guard. He said, "This is much better than listening to another woman boast about stealing my woman." Loberlin froze completely. The four words, "my woman," kept echoing in her mind. As Ian continued dancing, his movements suddenly became especially forceful. His mind was filled with the scene from earlier of Loberlin together with another man. The more he thought about it, the more unfair it felt. Loberlin was pulled into a stumble. Before she could steady herself, she angrily questioned him, "Your Highness, what madness is this now?" Ian had completely overturned the jar of jealousy. He said righteously, "I'm just unhappy. You were chatting so happily with that Marquis. What right do you have to accuse me instead?" Loberlin was left speechless. The distance between them was already outrageously close. This was not like arguing at all. It was clearly the two of them testing each other's limits. Ian no longer intended to pretend. He directly pressed down on Loberlin's hand, his tone so domineering that she could not refuse. He said, "Do not move. The one who is truly jealous right now is me." Loberlin froze completely, unable to say a word. She could only listen as he complained softly by her ear. He said that he really cared, because what he had originally wanted was her first dance. Since he had missed the beginning, Ian simply declared his claim outright. He said, "Then tonight, your last dance must be mine." The atmosphere on the terrace was romantic to the extreme, but no one noticed that in the shadows not far away, a mysterious figure wearing a black cloak had already fixed their gaze on them. The current Marquis was practically the center of everyone's attention. After all, he held the largest trade association in his hands. Everyone was busy currying favor with this god of wealth. But behind this liveliness, the truly ruthless players were hiding in the dark. Camilla sighed that even the arrogant Beller had been taken down by him. His methods were truly admirable. It had to be known that Beller had been a hard bone to chew. Even the Emperor had been unable to deal with him. Yet, once the Marquis made a move, he sent him to prison in an instant. Camilla knew very well that this kind of person would definitely not be easy to deal with. Rather than making him an enemy, it would be better to win him over before anyone else could. She had even begun planning to contact the Marquis through the underground forces. While she was at it, she would also have to deal with that coachman. But the man beside her was listening absent-mindedly. He stared at the Marquis for a long time, feeling that he had seen that face somewhere before. He suspected there was something suspicious between the Marquis and the Queen, but Camilla coldly shut him down, telling him to use his brain before speaking. Although he apologized aloud, his suspicion only grew stronger. He was certain he had seen that face somewhere before. At this moment, the Marquis was effortlessly socializing with various prominent figures. He even took the initiative to invite everyone to visit his new home. Damn it, the clue was now completely cut off. The newspaper reported that the suspect had died in an abandoned house. Clearly, Queen Camilla had silenced him by killing him. Ian knew very well that now, with the witness dead, there was no proof. The truth behind the carriage accident had been completely buried. Although he was furious inside, he knew he absolutely could not act rashly now, or the situation would only become worse. So he decided to stay still for the time being. But immediately afterward, Ian dropped another bombshell. He intended to put the engagement matter aside for now. The moment these words came out, Brian across from him was completely stunned. Queen Camilla's methods would absolutely not stop here. If one chess piece became useless, she would immediately set her sights on a second. Ian knew very well that if he rushed into an engagement now, he would only be playing right into her hands. So he decided to wait a little longer. Although Brian was somewhat surprised, he quickly understood the stakes. He accepted the most important task. In the coming days, every move on the Emperor's side had to be watched closely. Although Brian spoke polite words aloud, his heart was not at ease at all. He knew very well that the current bottleneck was only temporary. If Loberlin continued staying by Ian's side, sooner or later, she would become a living target for the Queen. Camilla, that woman, would never let go of any threat. What made things even more troublesome was that unfathomable Marquis. Ever since the incident at the banquet, all the clues had become tangled and unclear. No matter what that man was plotting, Brian absolutely could not let him get close to Loberlin. Brian secretly swore in his heart that no matter how the situation changed next, he would definitely protect Loberlin. After much difficulty, the three of them finally managed to gather together. Thinking back to the last banquet, the scene had been a complete mess. Brian had been busy socializing, while Loberlin had personally stepped in to deal with the villain. Cornelia smiled and said that thanks to everyone, they could finally have a peaceful day today and broaden their horizons here. It had to be said that the Marquis's residence was truly magnificent. Everything everywhere glittered. It seemed they could finally have a stable, peaceful day today. Cornelia was pulled aside for a private conversation, supposedly to thank her for her help before. Once Cornelia left, only Brian and Loberlin remained at the scene. Loberlin looked at Cornelia's back and sighed that their young lady really was unbelievably popular. But once the surroundings quieted down, Brian's tone suddenly became somewhat hesitant. He finally brought up what had happened that night. Loberlin was quite calm. Instead, she smiled and teased him. "Are you worried about me?" She could not help laughing aloud, saying that Brian actually knew how to worry about her now. Clearly, when they were young, she had always been the one taking care of this little follower. Brian tried several times to speak, but Loberlin kept talking on her own, telling him not to worry blindly anymore, and saying she was perfectly fine now. Brian's tone became more serious than ever before. He said, "Loberlin, all my feelings for you are sincere." The moment these words came out, Loberlin froze completely. Brian's words were simply the steadiest promise. He said that as long as Loberlin needed him, she could come to him as a backer at any time. Loberlin smiled and apologized, but inside, she could not stop muttering to herself. A gentle and reliable man like this had practically taken the perfect male lead script. However, she had come here specially today, not just to hear these pleasant words. She had already made plans in her heart. She had to use this banquet to completely settle the relationship between Cornelia and Brian. The ideal was full and beautiful, but reality immediately poured cold water on Loberlin. At this kind of high-end social occasion, everyone discussed border defense and major taxation matters. As someone who wrote novels, she simply could not join the conversation in such a setting. She could only watch helplessly as Brian and the others held long discussions full of grand principles. Looking over at Cornelia's side, things were not much better. She was surrounded by noble ladies, practically treated like the moon among stars. Everyone was praising Cornelia's elegance and perfection, wishing they could say every pleasant word in existence. Although Cornelia was smiling, she was clearly so busy she could not get away. Now Loberlin was completely alone. The proactive attack she had planned could not even find an opportunity to begin. Since no one was paying attention to her, Loberlin simply decided to spend some time alone. She quietly slipped out of the crowd and planned to wander around the Grand Mansion. Once she started walking, it truly opened her eyes. Even if she did not understand architectural art, she could still see how impressive this place was. She followed the corridor all the way forward, unaware of what was waiting for her ahead. The large door at the end of the corridor successfully aroused Loberlin's curiosity. She gently pushed open the door and discovered an entirely different world inside. This was no ordinary room. It was practically a huge indoor garden. Before she could clearly take in the surrounding scenery, she noticed someone standing beside the fountain. It was actually Marquis Maxwell. The Marquis smiled and said, "I've been waiting for you." Loberlin was completely stunned. There was no one else nearby. Could he really have been waiting for her? What he said next made her feel even more uncertain. He said that he had originally intended to personally come and greet her, but had not expected to run into her here. Faced with the Marquis's enthusiastic welcome, Loberlin was a little overwhelmed. She kept feeling as though something was hidden behind his smile. The Marquis first showered her with praise, saying she looked as beautiful today as these hydrangeas. He also said these flowers held great meaning for him. To properly raise such delicate things, he had spent no small amount of money installing a drainage system. Just as the atmosphere was turning pleasant, he suddenly changed the subject and asked how the gathering earlier had been. Loberlin froze for a moment and could only give a vague reply, saying it had been fairly nice. The Marquis suddenly lowered his stance and said he had been afraid the gathering earlier had been too dull. After all, the guest list had been full of top-ranking great nobles. He even apologized, saying that if he had made her uncomfortable, then it was his fault. Loberlin hurriedly waved her hands, saying that this was the kind of place most people could not attend even if they begged. So how could she possibly feel uncomfortable? But there was still a question lingering in her heart. If it was so much trouble, why had he insisted on inviting her? The Marquis's next answer made the air fall silent. He said, "I simply wanted to comfort you." Loberlin clearly had not reacted yet. As the Marquis handed the flowers to her, he explained gently that lately she had always been getting dragged into other people's messes, and it must have been terribly exhausting. He only wanted to do something to make her feel a little better. Looking at the armful of flowers, Loberlin had no room left for suspicion and was filled only with surprise and delight. Seizing the right moment, the Marquis followed up by asking whether she could stay with him a little longer. This gentle trap came one layer after another. No matter who it was, they probably would not have been able to refuse. Seen up close, this Marquis really was excessively handsome. As the two walked, they began talking about serious matters. Hearing that Beller had already been confined to his territory for reflection, Loberlin sighed and said she hoped there would be no more victims in the future. In the end, the Marquis started that routine again, saying that it was all thanks to her. Loberlin quickly responded politely, saying that it was all thanks to his help. Wait, why did this conversation sound more and more familiar? Loberlin suddenly realized that this was exactly the same back-and-forth flattery they had exchanged in the ballroom before. The atmosphere instantly became a little awkward. She had to change the subject quickly. How was she supposed to keep this conversation going? This feeling was too strange. The Marquis's expression was clearly very gentle, yet his eyes were as cold as blocks of ice. Loberlin's heart kept sinking. When she was with Ian, she had never felt this uncomfortable. She really could not stand the silence. So she pointed at a door in the corner and, with nothing else to say, asked what it was. The Marquis casually answered that it was a storage room for gardening tools. As a result, Loberlin seemed to have grabbed onto a lifeline and began praising a pile of shovels, saying that for such a large greenhouse, the tools must surely be especially important. This awkward small talk had reached the highest possible level. Even the Marquis could not hold back and was directly amused by her. Seeing Loberlin desperately searching for something to talk about, the Marquis instead spoke first and apologized, asking whether he was too dull and had made her feel bored again. How could Loberlin dare admit that? She hurriedly shook her head and said it was absolutely nothing of the sort. But immediately afterward, the Marquis's tone suddenly changed. He asked if he could consult her about something. Loberlin had not yet realized the severity of the problem and agreed without thinking. In the end, the Marquis directly dropped a bombshell. He asked, "Have you heard? that the news that the crown prince is going to get engaged? The moment these words came out, Loberlin completely failed to react. This topic had changed far too quickly. Why was he asking this? Could it be that he had seen her together with Ian? The Marquis then explained that he had heard the prospective crown princess, Cornelia, was a good friend of hers. After all, a major political marriage like this was extremely important for running a trade association. So he wanted to see whether she had any inside information. Hearing this, Loberlin finally relaxed. Thank goodness he had not discovered anything strange. She hurriedly distanced herself from the matter, saying that although the two of them were on good terms, she did not know the specific details either. Following along with the conversation, the Marquis then asked, "Then for the festival in a few days, will you be going with Cornelia?" Loberlin refused without even thinking, saying that Cornelia was usually very busy and probably would not have time to attend such an event. The Marquis suddenly made a direct request. "Then how about going with me?" Loberlin was completely stunned. Was he asking her to go to the festival with him to her face? Not only did the Marquis not deny it, he even said that he had already expressed his position before. He truly wanted to get to know Loberlin better and spend more time with her. This sudden enthusiasm only made Loberlin feel uneasy. What exactly did he see in her? Even more troublesome was that she had already promised to go to the festival in a few days with Ian. Loberlin could only brace herself and refuse. She said she already had a prior engagement and really could not accompany him. Seeing the Marquis working hard to hide his disappointment, Loberlin felt even worse. She somehow felt like a traitor who had betrayed her superior. After all, her promise with Ian was also very important. She could only say softly, "I'm sorry." The Marquis, however, behaved very gracefully. He said it was all right and that he would wait for the next opportunity. Faced with the Marquis's renewed invitation, Loberlin could only continue to be evasive, politely saying that if there was a chance, she would definitely go. But while everything in the greenhouse was peaceful, the situation elsewhere had changed completely. A crisp shattering sound came from the room. Beller was furiously smashing things. He was also cursing and demanding alcohol. No matter how he thought about it, he could not understand how everything he had originally planned had turned into this mess. In his view, the culprit behind all of this was entirely Loberlin. Just then, an unfamiliar maid pushed the door open and walked in. At this point, Beller saw everyone as an assassin. He directly questioned who she was. This maid, however, did not panic at all. She said she had come here specifically to look for work with a letter of recommendation. Beller gave a cold laugh, feeling that this was far too much of a coincidence. He had just frightened away more than half of his servants, and someone had immediately come to fill the vacancy. Although he was still suspicious, seeing how calm she was, Beller could not find any fault with her for the moment. Beller stared at the newly arrived maid before him, a dangerous, playful look in his eyes. He said she looked frail and delicate, just the type he liked. He even called her Coco affectionately and asked what good things she had brought him. Coco was very obedient. While steadily pouring tea, she said that she had brewed it herself. Beller was clearly a little surprised. What had been brought to him in the middle of the night was not alcohol. It was tea. Coco explained unhurriedly that these tea leaves were especially popular overseas and would definitely benefit his current condition. Beller gave a cold snort and sat down. Although his mouth was still threatening her, telling her to behave and not get any crooked ideas, he had clearly already accepted the cup of tea. Coco smiled and urged him, saying that this tea had to be drunk while it was hot. Beller lifted the cup and sniffed it. Indeed, he had never smelled this fragrance before. He thought to himself that this imported product must not have been cheap. But right after he drank the first sip, his entire body suddenly froze. Immediately afterward, Beller's tone became extremely strange. He said that after drinking this tea, he really did feel wonderful, and his whole body even felt a little light and floating. Seeing Beller in this dazed and delirious state, Coco revealed a smile beside him that sent a chill down one's spine. The extra ingredient added to this cup of tea had finally begun to take effect.